Chapter 1. The New Shepherd. The church had always been a dark thing against the river, even in summer when the water stropped itself bright on stones and boys dared each other to jump from the bridge. In February it seemed to lean, slate roof pitched like a shoulder against the wind, its brick damp enough to remember ice. St. Bartholomew of the River had a parish graveyard that crowded right up to the south side foundation, headstones like old teeth. Moss furred the angels' toes. The bell rope hung in the narthex smelling of hemp and damp wood, and the hands of 100 years' worth of ushers, men who stood between the weather and women in hats. Moran had not meant to come back to town, let alone to Massachusetts. The last time she'd sat in a pew she'd been 19 and smug, lean in a way that felt like a philosophy, hair in a ponytail that said she was leaving and would not be the sort to write letters. Cities had obliged that story for a while. But cities tire, and fathers have strokes. Boxes need labeling in a house that hoards its own air. She came because the realtor wanted a signature, and the care home wanted a check, and some part of her wanted to see the one thing that had never changed its face when she told it she was better than it. 12 people scattered themselves wide in the nave and called it a congregation. It was a Sunday evening mass, a compromised time the schedule had learned out of politeness to shift workers, elder knees, and the way the mill sirens used to own daylight. Some of the old men were gone. The mill was gone. The sirens had the decency to be rare now. The stained glass gave a last polite color to the river gray dusk. Purple and green fell in slanted rectangles over the empty front pews. Candles did what candles always do, made work of being small fires. He stood with his back to them while he set the paten and the chalice, sleeves crisp, vestments spare. The new priest. Mara had heard 3 versions of his name since Friday. Vale or Vale. Someone at the diner had said, and the short order cook had offered a confident Vane, like weather. The bulletin said Father Silas Vane, pastor in a font that had tried to be friendly. He turned, and the space behind Mara's sternum found a shape to sit in. He was not handsome the way men on calendars are handsome, but the eye forgives a certain exactness. Early middle age, which could mean anywhere from 35 to a spared 50. He wore his hair close the way priests do who have found the line between ascetic and expensive, and his face had the pallor of men who know the sun by rumor. His mouth, when it rested, did not make the line most men's mouths make. It relaxed into something that suggested he had practiced silence as a vocation. When he stepped to the ambo, his voice wasn't loud, wasn't theatrical. He spoke like a man learning the room rather than owning it, and still the room agreed. This parish knew other shepherds, he said, acknowledging the empty chair by the sacristy door where Father Ignatius had coughed his last winter. You have survived kindness and neglect. I'm not naive about numbers. Buildings have longer memories than bodies. But we are not a building, we are a thirst. Mara felt the phrase in the place her certainty lives. Old women leaned forward, without creaking. The old usher, Doyle, perpetually in a blazer the color of a winter crow, nodded like a metronome. The altar boy, Tomas, Elena Ortiz's great-nephew. Mara remembered his aunt's hair hot-rolled for weddings, stared at the floor in the way boys in borrowed cassocks do when the air is too heavy to look up into. The voice continued, unhurried. You know the story of the woman at the well, Father Vane said. No bucket deep enough, no man good enough. Give me this water, that I may not thirst nor come here to draw. She wanted to be done with it, thirst, and the work that comes with it. Most of us do. We want to be finished. Christ did not finish her. He kept her. He taught her that desire itself can be baptized. Mara looked at his hands. Long, the nail beds clean, the tendons under the skin like well-drawn pen lines. He set his palm on the heavy wood of the ambo, and a part of her that had spent the last years grubbing for novelty in magazine profiles thought, cynically and with a small regret, she didn't have time to like. He knows lines. He writes them on paper or on rooms. He is writing one now with his hand. After the gospel and the quiet homily that left nobody humiliated, the liturgy moved the way it always had, muscle memory guiding a body with half-forgotten prayers. He chanted the Sanctus in a key you could step into wearing boots. Communion was orderly, dull, fed by habit. When Mara reached the rail, she realized she had miscalculated her appetite for being old again. The pattern trembled minutely in her peripheral. She found herself wanting to laugh or weep. Old reflexes bickering. Father Vane's eyes were a gray that could be mistaken for blue by people eager for beauty. They were steady on hers only as long as the rite required. The body of Christ. She said amen because you do or you don't. She was too tired to invent a middle. After Mass, he did the thing the best of them do. He stood by the doors and allowed himself to be held like a coat rack for griefs. He learned names without threatening to remember them. He took hands that were dry and hands that were damp. Mara would have slipped by, but Doyle's palm, blue-veined and sure, found her shoulder. Ray's girl, he announced with a municipal pride that pretends to forget how abnormal it is for a man to remember a girl's jawline after 20 years. Father, this is Mary, Mara, Ray Moran's. Mara, she said. Mary's my aunt in Toledo. I'm the one who left. It emerged sharper than she meant it. He didn't flinch. Father Silas, he said. I know your father from the roster of men who keep this place repaired. He stapled plastic over the sacristy window during the January of '98 when the river wanted to be invited in. He had good hands, Mara said, surprised at the tense she chose and unwilling to correct it. They remember what to do even when his mouth forgets. Then I will be in his debt sooner than later, Vane said easily. We are a building with needs and a people with more important ones. Doyle, eager to demonstrate that a priest is a napkin that cleans any conversational spill, squeezed Mara's shoulder. Father's starting a midnight vigil. New thing. Well, old thing, but new here. Mondays. For those who hunger and thirst. He says we cannot pretend day isn't killing us. We'll ask for what's due in the proper hour. A vigil, Mara repeated. In her childhood, vigils had been the province of women who forgot to go home because their husbands had done something unforgivable to the wine. They were songs sung off-key under candles put in jars. Midnight seems late for God. Midnight is exactly on time for him, Father Vane said and smiled, which changed his face. It was not a seduction smile. It was the compromised smile of a man who has learned to meet foolishness with affection. It is when the thirsty finally tell the truth about their thirst. Father says he'll baptize the ones that want it, Doyle added, half proud, half nervous. Some of us were done at 4 weeks, with a godmother who never showed up and a little shell of water, like a joke. This will be, what did you call it, Father? A remembrance, Vane said. A waking into the promise that was made for us when we were too small to drink it. I'm not replacing the sacrament. I'm honoring it. It's a different cup. Mara found she disliked the way the word cup sat in the air. The fragrance of beeswax and old hydrangeas rose, as if memory were a hand. She made her mouth polite. Well, I hope it helps. When she stepped into the night, she had the sensation of carrying someone else's coat. The river ran invisible but present beyond the black trunks, its noise like breath with patience. A car passed on the far road, and the tires whispered on salt. She felt watched in the way small towns watch you. Not by a person, by the balance of what the town knows and refuses to admit. At the diner, because you go where coffee behaves, she slid into a booth by the window and a waitress set a mug down without asking because some faces carry their orders in their bones. The waitress had a name badge that said Maddie and a mouth that had rehearsed sympathy for a decade. I saw you at Mass, Maddie said. Didn't mean to spook you by letting you be, but I'm out of practice talking to ghosts. I'm not a ghost, Mara said, and then, because the line had wanted to be said even if it didn't want to be true, I came back to sell a house. You, and every other person who left after 12th grade, Maddie said. Father Ignatius went and died and left us short. The new one's got a voice. He also has a vigil, Mara said. Midnight baptisms. Maddie's mouth made a small shape that wasn't quite a laugh. You heard that too. Baptisms. That's a word we use to spend carefully. You don't like him. I don't like men who sit you down at dusk and tell you that midnight is when God will see you proper, Maddie said simply. I don't like seeing Mrs. Callahan looking, she groped. Relieved, that's the word. On a Tuesday morning after one of those. She's 82. Relief looks like sin on a woman that age. What happens at the vigil? I'm not the curious sort, Maddie said, and then gave herself away with a fast addition. Sister Ruth went the first night and came in here at 2 and wouldn't eat, which I take as a sign of apocalypse. She sat with her tea and held the cup like it was a hot head and said they were calling it remembrance, and she saw nothing wrong, but she had the wrong look in her eye, like someone who's watched a dog stare at a door as if it knew a new trick. Mara wrapped her fingers around the cup, the way people hold cups when they have refused to hold hands for too long. Across the room, a deputy she hadn't seen in 15 years raised 2 fingers in a salute old friends improvise, so as not to be caught admitting tenderness. Caleb Price had been the boy who didn't leave. He looked tired in the way men look tired when they sleep in their boots. He came to the table without ceremony. Moran, he said, which she took as a whole story about who she'd been and what she had chosen. Your dad gives the nurses hell? He gives them advice on how to fold towels, which is worse, Mara said. He's still him, just shorter. Everything's shorter, he said, a poor joke that tried all the same. He nodded toward the church. You heard what they're doing. I heard a name for it, Mara said. I heard a promise. Caleb scratched the back of his neck, as if the word itself had bitten. We've had 3 calls after midnight that felt wrong on paper and worse in the air. No crime, just agitation. A woman called in because her husband went walking without his coat after something at the church and stood by the river and said he wasn't cold. A boy got a nosebleed that wouldn't stop. He told his mother he'd been baptized again, and now he understood the taste of it. That's not how kids talk. You think it's drugs. I think this place can make a drug out of faith if you sell it to it in the right bottle, Caleb said. I think I don't like the way some of them look around Dawn, like they've been out drinking and also like they've been fed something good. Mara thought of the old women bent over on Mondays in the grocery, of men who had once had forearms like timber and now had wrists like question marks. She thought of what relief looks like on a body. I'll go, she heard herself say, to the vigil. You don't have to save them, Caleb said, and she had to laugh at the way he knew her on the second day, as if the last 19 years had been an awkward long breath. I'm a photographer with a storage unit full of unframed restraint. Not a saint, she said. I'm curious. That's all. Curiosity is how saints break, Maddie put in, pouring Caleb coffee he hadn't asked for but would drink. And I'll have you know, if Father Vane is anything he says he is, I don't need to meet the proof. Men who promise you won't be thirsty again either want your soul or your bank routing number. Sometimes your blood, Caleb said lightly. Don't, Maddie said sharply, because the diner didn't like the word blood at night. On the way back to her father's house, Mara drove slow past the church, not to stalk it, she told herself, but to see if the stone changed shape in the dark. A woman with a scarf around her head stood by the rectory door. Vane spoke to her with his hand on the jamb, as if he had learned to be a threshold. He looked up, as men do when a car's headlights glance where light is not usually invited. His eyes did not find hers. She was across the street, but she had the sensation of being counted and filed. She parked in front of her father's porch with the engine ticking its warm down and watched it breathe steam in the cold. She rubbed her thumb over the ridge where her camera's straps liked to sit. Monday at midnight had never sounded like a place. Now it was one, and the coordinates had everything to do with a font and a man who did not tan. In the morning, the care home needed forms signed and the realtor needed signatures, and her father needed her to find the yellow-handled screwdriver that had not lived in the kitchen drawer since 2009. The day was paper. At dusk, a wind came in off the river with a taste of old iron. Midnight, she told herself, just to look. She put on her black coat and the scarf her father had called a city rag, and when she opened her door, the night smelled like stone that had been licked. Chapter 2, Night Water. They didn't ring the big bell. It would have been indecent. St. Bart's had a small brass one someone had salvaged from a shut convent. It made a sound like silver coins in an apron pocket. At 11:45 it spoke once from the narthex, and again at 11:55. People came as if called by a rumor they were too proud to repeat. 14 at first, then 22, then over 30. Some of the faces Mara knew by thickness of brow and habit of jaw. Evelyn Callahan had brought her sister, the one who never married. Tomas stood at the back in an oversized hoodie. Altar boy repose traded for a 17-year-old shrug. Sister Ruth, tiny as a match but dressed for weather, kept her rosary in her pocket and rubbed it like a man polishes coins. The pews held men who had lain under cars their entire work lives and women whose hands had learned the ache of carts. As many stood as sat, as if the bench were a promise they weren't ready to admit wanting. Candles were set mid-nave on 4 iron stands, the flames small as punctuation. The sanctuary lamps burned low. The font at the rear had been moved forward, rolled, really the casters squeaking like old knees, to stand on the lowest step of the altar platform. It was an old Roman thing, marble and chipped, shrouded with linen so the lip would not be cold on babies in December. Now the linen had been folded back like a collar. In the bowl the water was dark, no trick of candlelight, an honest darkness like river water at night. The surface held itself in a way that said somebody had asked it to be important. He did not enter from the sacristy door as he would at Massachusetts. He came from the side aisle, walking with the slow claim men make when they know a room will forgive them anything if they don't hurry. No vestments, a black cassock and a narrow cincture, the way old photographs of priests look when they weren't afraid of being taken for a priest outside the sanctuary. He took no ombo, no throne. He stood by the font with his hands on the marble, as if steadying a child. "We'll keep the shape," he said. "Water. The word. The breath. No one is reborn tonight, not at midnight, in a building, in February. Birth is a mess God prefers to handle himself. What we can do is remember, not recall. Mind you, remember. To make the members whole again." The word choice was careful. Anything with blood in it could do damage. Mara had placed herself in the shadow of the last column before the transept because shadows are where you watch without consenting. From here, she could see the profile the bulletin had insisted on. He had the sort of ears that never moved no matter how the wind argued, a Roman thing her aunt in Toledo would have blessed herself for. When he bowed his head, the nape of his neck showed pale and fine-haired above the collar. She took photographs in her mind, because the camera would have made her a thief, and she wasn't ready to be a thief in this language. The sound of the river outside had learned to be a hush. "We've had a hunger," he said, "longer than our grandparents can remember." The mills closed, and the men who knew the weight of red-hot iron were asked to learn office chairs. The women learned to carry worry in places their doctors didn't examine. Your children made lives in cities that never learned to know their names. And still you came here, the few of you who remembered this address, with your thirst. You wanted to be seen. You wanted to be known. And the church bought a new roof and called it love. Someone near the front made the sound people make when they've been called on something tender and are grateful for the rudeness. Sister Ruth kept rubbing the rosary. The water did not work, but it seemed to listen. "I am not here to give you a speech," he said. "I am here to make a promise old enough to be new." He rested one hand on the font, and for a second she saw the vein at his wrist leap and lift like a fish in shallow water. It was fast, the kind of motion you can argue yourself out of having seen. He did not pull away from the bowl as a sensible man would in a cold church. He leaned into it as if heat lived there. "How do you remember a thing that was done to you when you were too small to help?" he asked softly. "You taste it. You let it touch your head. You say your name, and someone else says it back, as if it were better than you'd been told." Mara felt 4s, 5s, 6s, ages blur, hands on the crown of her head, water making her down into hair. She felt the long hallway of catechism smells, paste, dust, the chalk on Sister Immaculata's thumb. She felt recoil, too. Not fear, not yet some other sense that in a better world would be called readiness. A woman stepped forward. Mrs. Callahan's mouth tried to be brave and managed gracious instead. "I was baptized as an infant," she said as if confessing a failure. "So was I," he said, smiling, unthreatened by the small joke. "Tonight we baptize our thirst." He cupped water. If it were water, it fell like water does from fingers. It darkened the white of the linen where it dripped. He touched the wet to her hair, a cross drawn so lightly it could have been imagined. He put his palm at the back of her neck, brief, fatherly. Then he did a thing Mara had to translate into sense. He raised his other hand and touched his own lower lip, quick as a man checking for chaff. He spoke over her head, not to make a show, the old formula. Ego te baptizo in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, familiar enough to close the throat. She made the sign of the cross like a girl who once took it seriously because someone was watching. She stepped back weeping with relief that embarrassed her and did not seem to embarrass him. Next, he said gently, they came in order of courage. Men who had ached all day stepped into tenderness they would have mocked from a couch. Sister Ruth came, because nuns never let layfolk do dangerous things without supervision. Tomas came last of the young with the hunch of those who intend to remember what they felt but not show it. Each time the hand went to the head, the other hand flicked, brief, to the lip. It might have been nervousness. It might have been a habit. In the old Mass, the priest used to kiss the altar, the book, the chalice. Here, he kissed the night or drank it. When he raised his head and looked at the line, his eyes were glassy, not with tears. With hunger satisfied well enough to be docile for a while. He kept his mouth closed between phrases the way a man keeps from laughing at a wake. The scent, Mara told herself she was inventing it, had the tang iron leaves on a tongue when you bite too hard. The bowl's dark did not lighten as you'd expect with use. It kept its black the way a well keeps its depth no matter how many times a bucket is raised. Once, when he leaned too close, the little metal crucifix strung to the edge of the font with a ribbon knocked against porcelain. The sound of it made the whole nave pull in, small and involuntary, like a rune hearing a child flinch. Caleb had taken a post in the last pew under the choir loft. Not in uniform, hands in pockets, a local deity pretending to be furniture. He met Mara's eyes once and tipped his chin up in a question. You seeing this? She gave the smallest movement that meant later. They both looked back, because looking away felt like irresponsibility. When it was Tomas' turn, Vane's mouth softened in a way Mara did not like. It wasn't indecency. It wasn't anything that could be reported. It was recognition of a flavor. Blood is young, the body says, blood is new. Tomas bent his head. Vane's fingers came away wet. He pressed them to the boy's crown. He spoke the words. He brought the tips of those fingers to his own lip, and in that second his mouth made a shape the room. Tired, flattered, hopeful, did not know how to interpret. It was not animal. It was not lascivious. It was reverent. Sister Ruth saw it. The rosary stopped moving in her pocket. She made the smallest motion, comical almost, to anyone not educated in stage whisper, as if to step between the priest and the font, then restrained herself and did the harder thing. She stayed where a nun is placed by God and habit, at the edge of a vow, and watched. Some of you, Father Vane said when the last of them had been wet, are frightened at how you feel. Good. Fear is an organ. So is relief. Take them home. Sleep with them. Do not harsh your mouth with explanations in the morning. Let the body decide how to keep what it has been given. He raised his hand the way men do when they're about to intone a blessing. The room tilted to receive it. He did not finish the gesture. He lowered his hand like a man remembering he prefers smaller economies of power. Go in peace, he said simply. If you cannot go, stay. They did both. The old ladies filed out with the discipline of women who had once had to file out of factories. Men stood and tried not to look touched. Tomas called night without meeting anyone's eyes and bolted into the cold. Sister Ruth waited for the last back and followed, the rosary moving again like a little machine trained to say names. Mara found herself where she had said she would not be, at the front, in the pocket of shadow beside the font. Up close, the dark in the bowl was worse. It had no smell, and the smell of everything else, stone, paraffin, people, knew to stand aside. A ring of faint foam clung to the marble at the edge, as if something had been poured gently, but with conviction. She bent, not to touch, just to see. The surface did not give back a clean reflection. It pulled her face long, and she saw her mouth and thought of childhood. Open. She straightened too fast, and the church did that cold tilt again. When she looked up, he was close. You watch like a professional, he said mildly. A skeptic with manners. I watched like a local, she said. People I know came forward. It's a primitive instinct to make sure nobody hands them a loaded metaphor. Did you object to the old water? The mouth did something not unlike humor. I object to anything that makes relief illegal on a Tuesday, she said, and anything that pretends to cure February. I promise nothing, he said. It offends God and gets men sued. He touched the rim of the font with one finger, and in the gesture, she saw it cleanly at last. The nail on his right index was darker than the others, bruised at the quick as if he had slammed it in a door a week ago and the body had decided to keep the history. He turned toward the sacristy, lifted the font's linen collar, and laid it back over the bowl with an odd tenderness, like covering a sleeping child's ear. He did not blow out the sanctuary lamps. He did not touch her again. In the doorway he paused. "Ray Moran's daughter," he said, not needing to see her nod. "Your father built the shelf in the sacristy closet with a level that insisted on its own salvation. It has not sagged." "He's stubborn," she said. "Even stubborn men can be taught a different thirst," he said. "Bring him, if you like. We have water. He will recognize." She stood in the nave after he was gone and felt the room trying to decide what to be to her. A childhood set, a memory, a threat, a joke. The candles learned to be smaller versions of themselves. The iron smell, which she had insisted was not there, fell into her mouth for one insulted instant, like a word a child insists she does not know and says perfectly the first time. She turned toward the door and nearly collided with Sister Ruth. The nun had the sort of face children confess to even when they are not suspected, comfortably lined, thin with the fat in the right places, eyes that carry their own lamps. Up close she smelled of wool and boiled tea. "You are Ray's girl," she said in the way the town says the genealogy of your cheekbones out loud. "You all remember faces like librarians," Mara said. "I left before you took attendance." "I don't need to take attendance," Sister Ruth said. "God tells me who isn't there." Mara let herself like the line. "Do you like what he did?" she asked, because nuns know when the nouns are wrong. "I like water," Sister Ruth said. "I like midnight. I like people who stop pretending their mouths aren't dry. I don't like the way he touches his mouth after touching heads. I don't like that the water stays dark no matter how many foreheads take it. I don't like seeing Tomas leave with the look boys get when a man has just told them a secret and didn't. That's a lot of likes and dislikes for a vow of obedience," Mara said, gentle. "Obedience doesn't include my eyes," the nun replied. "It includes what I do with what they've seen." She hesitated, then added with that small, fierce mercy people once expected from saints. "He's not wicked. Or not only. That would be simpler. He's hungry in a way that learned table manners." "I've seen that before," Mara said, thinking of editors who fed on new voices and fed them back to the wrong mouths. "What do we do?" "You'll do what you always did," Sister Ruth said. "You'll look, but don't go alone to look. Bring," she paused. "Bring the boy who stayed. The deputy who doesn't like to be a door. He's learned to stand in thresholds without making them worse." "Caleb," Mara said, surprised at the relief the name put in her mouth. "All right," Sister Ruth nodded. "And bring your father if you can. Not to the font, to the pew. He's stubborn. He'll keep his blood better if he can feel the wood." "His hands miss wood," Mara said, and in the same breath hated herself for having made a sentence from a man's private ache. Outside, the river carried the night downstream as if it owned it. She stood on the steps with the nun and let their breath make a small fog. Across the street, a light burned in the rectory. Not in the front room where a desk and a set of good chairs would perform their duty for parishioners, but in the kitchen. It is hard to hate a man who makes his own tea at midnight. It is easy, Mara thought, to underestimate what he adds to the cup. She tucked her scarf tighter, walked to her car, and forced herself to let the engine warm before she put it in gear. The road home took her past two places she had learned to hate unreasonably. The intersection where the mill whistles used to make talk useless and men had to speak with their shoulders, and the house with its porch light on because an old person lived there and believed in welcome as a superstition. When she stepped into her father's kitchen, it was as if she had gone underwater and found the shape of her own hand still sharking toward the surface. She set a pot on the stove and put the kettle to work not because she wanted tea, but because steam made sense. It made rooms honest. When she slept it was with the light over the sink on because that was the thing you did in this house when someone you loved might need to find the bathroom in the night. She dreamed of the font and of hands over heads and of a mouth that learned a polite way to live in the dark. And in the morning, when the care home called to ask whether she might bring a blanket because Ray didn't like the feel of their acrylic against his ankles, she said yes and brought him wool that had belonged to his grandfather. And on the way back, she drove very slowly past the church to see whether the linen over the bowl had dried. Chapter 3. Aqua Nigra. The care home had a way of making dignity look fluorescent. In daylight, the hallways were too clean to be believed. At night, they were too long for tired knees. Mara found her father in a wheeled armchair by the fish tank where two board tetras did the work of a river. He wore the wool blanket she'd brought last week, his father's, over his legs, and had tucked the edge under one knee with a stubborn precision his hands hadn't forgotten. They water the plants like they're porcelain, he said by way of greeting, eyes on the thin green thing that had encountered a fluorescent bulb and was considering it a son. I told them dirt is happier rude. Everything here is happier rude, Mara said. She touched the back of his hand. Warm, papery, the pulse a confident little hammer. I've brought the screwdriver with the yellow handle. The nurses say you're recruiting. They fold the towels like they're origami birds, he said. If I'm dying in a place, it's not going to be one that thinks corners are devotions. He looked at her. His gaze had the narrowness that comes when language and appetite get rationed. You went. At midnight, she said. There was no reason to call it vigil or remembrance. It had been a thing with water and a man and relief that made the room ashamed. You remember the font. I remember the river, he said. The mills sluiced their floors into it at shift change. Blood, beer, iron filings, spit. Men washed their hands in it and came home and let their wives kiss the iron out of their mustaches. She laughed because the sentence thought it was funny and deserved to be. There's a new priest. The one with a face, he said, not a question. Ignatius sent a letter once. Said if he got called away suddenly, a man was lined up to preach the funeral. He didn't sound relieved. You never liked priests. I like carpenters, he said. A man who measures twice is a religion. He rubbed the nap of the blanket between finger and thumb like a monk working a relic. Your grandmother told me a story when I was a boy because the river told it to her. Black water. Famine winter. A priest came who wasn't ours. He had a Latin nobody had been taught yet. He poured from a bottle into the font and made men line up at night like cattle and put his hand on their heads and call it promise. Your great-uncle Declan said the babies stopped dying that winter and 3 men went white at the temples in 2 months. Mara felt the small hairs at the back of her neck survive the central heating. And then spring came and the priest left and men got drunk in a decent way again, he said. And the women who had learned the habit of breathing in the dark forgot it. Some things in this town only happen when the river is mean. What did they call him? She asked, knowing the answer would offend sense. Father, he said. There are only so many names for men who get away with putting their hands on your head. She stayed another 20 minutes because leaving a father too soon makes his blanket slide in your mind later, and because she had inherited the Moran vice of not knowing when to stop being useful. On her way out, she found herself driving by the church without deciding to. The morning made St. Bart's look honest, brick too damp to pretend, windows clean enough to confess their lead. The side door stood unlatched. Deliveries and volunteers and old men with keys had always made lock discipline porous. The sacristy smelled like it had split a loaf of bread with winter. Wax, old soap, cedar. The shelf her father had built held up the albs like a sentence underlined. On the sink, galvanized iron, honest, soaked linens folded into squares of surrender. The top towel had a brown arc near its edge that no amount of church soap had persuaded back to grace. She bent, because seeing is dishonesty without detail. The stain was not new wine. It had the modest oxidation of last night's wound. She touched it with the tip of one fingernail and smelled the air that rose. Not copper. Not exactly. The memory of copper spoken through stone. In the drawer where you keep the things you don't want lay a small leather case with a monstrance stitched on its lid. Portable communion for last rites, her schooling supplied. Under it, an older relic of administration. The parish ledger, spine mended and taped the color of old teeth. She shouldn't.
She did.
Names in the thin, nervous hand of 3 pastors. Burials. Weddings. The peculiar pride of sacramental bookkeeping. Halfway through, older paper, older ink. Even the shape of the letters changed the way a face changes when you show it mercy. Vigilia Citientium, Vigil of the Thirsty, written 6 times over a winter of 1893, with attendance estimated in words rather than numbers. Dozens, half the town. God help us. Beside the entry, an initial like a thorn, SV. Her breath fogged the ledger page, because the sacristy window had learned to be winter again. She closed the book more carefully than you are required to. She slid it back under the Pix case, as if ignorance could be relidded in leather. "Can I help you?" A voice said, neutral, worn, not surprised enough to be a guard. Doyle stood in the doorway, wearing a cardigan that had learned to live on the backs of men who do favors. He did not look at the ledger, which is another sort of favor. "Father sent me to see if the linens were ready. He's got a hospital call." "They're soaking," she said, straightening. "Ray's shelf is holding." "He built like he meant it," Doyle said, pride transitive. He watched her a beat. "It's not a crime to be curious, Mara. It's a crime to leave and forget us." "I did both," she said. "Then you can balance your accounts," he said, reaching past her for the basin. He wrestled it up like a man lifting a sleeping child. "We've got more people coming at midnight than came all through Advent." Evelyn's sister said she tasted something she remembered from when she was 6 and fell off the fence and split her lip, and her mother said, "Hush, hush, hush." Mara stepped aside. "Doyle, the water." "I'm old enough not to lie about things that can be smelled," he said. "It's not bad. It's not wrong. It's old." He looked at her with a sudden precision she remembered from altar boy days when his eyes would cut to your hands as if reminding them of their job. "Don't try to save us from something you don't have a name for yet." At the diner, the coffee tasted like a small favor you return. Maddie came with the pot and didn't pour until words had asked to be said out loud. Sister Ruth came in for tea and wrote on a napkin, she said, and produced the napkin like contraband. Black water in a nun's schoolroom hand. Beneath, in smaller letters, no ring. "She sees everything," Mara said. She saw him touch his mouth. "She sees the mornings," Maddie said. "That's all I need." And then, because the mind is greedy for connections. "Have you seen Tomas?" "Twice in my rear view," Mara said. "Once on the bridge at dusk, pretending the rail was a friend." "He's been splitting strings," Maddie said. "He told Elena he can practice longer because he doesn't get dry in the mouth. He's been getting headaches." Something crossed her face that had nothing to do with waitressing and everything to do with a woman deciding whether to be feared or useful. "Caleb left you a note." The deputy's writing had the square patience of men who fill out forms and are polite to clipboards. 3 calls after midnight / adult male wandering / teen epistaxis / Mrs. Callahan fainted at market, hemoglobin 8.9. Doctor says anemia. Beneath you and I and sister are at next vigil. Bring your camera if you can stand it. Don't if you can't.
See.
She did not intend to go out looking for a boy on a bridge in February.
She did.
You learn the routes of those you were once a child around. The bridge convinces men it knows their names. Teenagers see something in the black between piers that looks like a face if you lean. Tomas leaned. Hood up, breath made small by stubbornness. His violin case leaned where boys lean things when they are practicing at having a life. He had a scab at the crown, tiny, the sort toddlers get when they collide with coffee tables. It was wrong in the delicate way wrong is obvious when skin is young. "You were at the baptism," she said, "because giving a child enough grammar to say yes is half your job." "Everybody was," he said, not turning his head. "Sister says it's remembrance. Father says it's not a sacrament. Is that worse or better?" "It's honest if it isn't lying," she said, "and it's smuggling if it is." He laughed once, the graceless crack in it betraying adolescence, and a complicated reliability. He said my name like he found it in a book and said it straight. "And now your head hurts," she said. "Too tired to sugar. Too done with beauty." "Only when I'm tired," he said. "I can run without coughing. I don't have to lick my teeth when I'm nervous. I slept for 4 hours, and it felt like 12. "That's the thing about relief," she said. "It can be rented." He turned his head just enough to let her see his profile. Boys' faces are poems when they start, then they become maps. Tomas's was in the middle country, a jaw not decided, a nose learning politics from weather. His eyes were too bright, like a fever you could name if you had a grant. "Sister Ruth went," he said. She stood near the font like she was about to spank it. I don't think she liked what he did with his mouth. "What did he do?" "Touched it," he said. "Like wine tasting when you pour for people with money." He said later it's just habit. The old right head kisses. "My uncle says people look for badness, like dogs look for dead birds." "What do you think?" Mara asked. He shrugged, a movement as heartbreakingly adult as any prayer. "I think I don't get winded when I run behind the mill anymore, and my mom thinks I'm being good, and I think he is good when he's talking, and I think after he puts his hand on your head there's a beat where you could do anything." "That last thing," she said. "Don't do anything." "Is it a sin to be less thirsty?" he asked, and his mouth had the courage to mean the question. "It's a sin to drink from a well that asks for a name you can't afford to give," she said. He nodded without drama. Boys are more obedient than anyone wants to credit. They just hide it under competent shoulder shrugs. He picked up his case. "Caleb's tailing me like I'm going to turn into a wolf," he said. "You can tell him not to stand right under the streetlight next time. He looks like a policeman in a story." "He is one," she said. "And you're not." He left with the particular sprint of an animal we are not permitted to call deer. She watched the river do its trick with lights and thought of the ledger and the older hand and the initial that had wanted to be a thorn. She drove home. She put the camera on the table. She covered it with a dish towel like a parlor trick for conscience. She slept the daylight off and woke to stone and a nun's writing on a napkin. Black water. Caleb came for her an hour before midnight, bareheaded in a coat that had endured 3 winters too many. "You can sit on the aisle," he said. "I'll take the back. Sister R can do what nuns do. She'll find the place where God's listening is best." Mara put on the scarf her father hated and the boots you wear when the floor might be a river. She slid the camera into her bag and did not promise herself anything with it. There are nights when you either steal or serve. She had not decided which made better penance. The church was already full. Not Easter full, not wedding full. The kind of full grief gets to be on Tuesdays for strangers when someone brings soup. The font had its collar folded back like a shirt reluctant to confess its throat. The bowl was full. The surface was darker than water is when it intends to be honest. Father Vane stood with his hands on the marble as if they were histories being kept. He looked neither tired nor triumphal. He looked practiced, which is worse. Mara slid into the shadow of the transept where a statue of a man with a book looks at holes in his own feet and pretends to be edifying. Sister Ruth took the end of the first pew and sat with her knees a degree wider than decorum prefers, a thing women do when they're about to lift something heavier than a chair. Caleb became threshold, reliable as furniture, colder than a door, more alive than a wall. The little bell in the narthex made its silver pocket sound. He did not preach. He did not need to. He reached for the small silver ampulla that had appeared by the bowl, a flask the size of a sacramental oil stock, unlidded it with an old neatness, and tipped 1 drop into the water. The black threaded itself outward with a tact of poison. The prayer he murmured over the bowl was not the blessing of Jordan water Mara had been taught to recognize. It was older, Latin without the scaffold of a common book. Aqua et sanguis testimonium perhabent. Water and blood bear witness. The room leaned in. He put his fingers to the surface. He lifted a cross onto a forehead. The other hand settled at the nape. Mara saw it clean now, what the darkened distance had denied last time. The ring on his right hand was not ostentatious, a plain band with a signet you might mistake for a fish if you wanted to be comforted. On its inner edge, A thorn not much larger than a sand burr had been welded, careful and old. When he laid his palm on the neck, the burr kissed skin the way an old woman pecks a cheek. Not enough to cry out. Enough to make the scalp blush, and the water honor the memory. It was catechesis written in blood, you could pretend was a metaphor. She looked at Sister Ruth without meaning to. The nun's eyes had not widened, they had narrowed. A mother watching a child tell a story with unnecessary embellishments. Her hand had gone to her pocket. The rosary did its work the way a familiar tool does when a job goes sideways. Mara lifted the camera out from under its dish towel conscience. She did not raise it. She flattened her palm atop it on her lap, as if to keep it from answering a call. He worked with a tenderness that would disgrace any accusation laid on it. Evelyn Callahan cried and said thank you in a whisper that made the old wood in the pew accept the word as an honest load. Men stood singly, dark coats unbuttoned. A boy in a Letterman jacket who would have looked ridiculous at any other sanctuary gave the old formula back in a voice that made men not laugh. Each time the same. Touch. Wet. Words. The flick to the lip that had grown quicker, like a man who has given up pretending he doesn't prefer this part. When it was Tomas's turn again, he flinched, just a degree, and then lifted his head like a person who has decided to be brave in the way that breaks mothers. Vane's hand paused a fraction over the boy's neck. He looked up, not at the congregation, but at the crucifix above the sanctuary's arch, a gesture that would have made a better man beloved. Then he pressed. The thorn did what metal does when asked to be a mouth. It took. He withdrew his hand. The boy's skin held a circle like a kiss from a radiator, pale already at the center. Vane's fingers went to his own mouth. He closed his eyes like a man making peace with an appetite. Mara stood without knowing she had. The camera hung in the balance between theft and witness. Caleb took one step from his post. He did not shout. He did not flash badge. Sister Ruth did a small, better thing. She stood, took hold of the bell rope at the side of the nave, and rang it once. It sounded like a pocket of silver breaking in the dark. Every head turned. Even the bowl's black considered it. "Father," she said, the word shaped like respect, but with a stiffening inside it like cane. "Your ring." The room did the human thing, the one that offends God less than we fear. Everyone pretended to look away from the point of embarrassment, so the embarrassed could choose to be dignified. He did not blush. He smiled a little the way men smile at a child who has remembered a story out of order. He slid the ring off his finger and held it up between thumb and forefinger toward the Undercroft lights so the congregation could see what they wanted to see. A symbol. A fish traced by a wire. The little burr catching and releasing light like a joke. "It's old," he said, and the room exhaled because old softens anything. A signet from a house that kept fishermen. The inner edge. I caught it on a drawer once. Bad repair. He glanced at Mara then, for the first time in intimacy aimed square. We all have our injuries. The ring into the pocket of his cassock. The hand back to the bowl. Shall we continue? There are thirsty. The moment passed not because it had to, but because no one wanted to hold it up to the light and ask it to be better. He finished the line of foreheads without hurrying, without shame. People came away with a look that wants to be called peace, and is sometimes the face relief makes when it forgets to hide. After, the church did what rooms do to save themselves. It shuffled. Men pretended to need their coats. Women found reasons to talk about casseroles. Tomas slipped to the porch steps and sat with his hands between his knees, not a boy, not a man, learning. Caleb stood behind him and became lantern post again. The night had the iron in it that makes lungs aware of their job. Mara waited until the sacristy door opened, and he crossed the sanctuary with a towel in his hands. She stepped into the aisle without a mind to ask permission.
"Father," she said.
It sounded argumentative just because her mouth had unlearned serenity. The ledger. He paused a heartbeat, enough time for a better man to decide to lie. He didn't. Ignatius liked keeping the past tidy, he said. I prefer it rag. Vigilia Citientium, she said. The winter of 1893. He didn't look surprised. His face had the expression of a man trying to judge whether a dog is the sort that will take a whistle. This town does not forget what helps it, he said. We are the stewards of memory. Stewardship doesn't draw blood, she said, and her voice broke on the last word because there was a boy on the porch steps, and she had been 20 once, and she had refused to love anything that might die. The head bleeds if you look at it hard, he said mildly. Sister Ruth remembers that from novitiate first aid. Stop touching your mouth, she said, surprising herself, because there are moments when you stop dressing your sentences and send them out barefoot. He smiled, only a little, not triumph so much as a man allowing himself to admit a preference. We don't stop being bodies because we've been made into symbols, he said. He set the towel on the lip of the font, lifted the linen collar across the bowl, and smoothed it with both palms. He did it as if smoothing bedclothes over someone you love enough to lie to. Would you like to see something? No, she said, and meant yes. He led her into the sacristy and to the wall where small frames list priests so time doesn't get arrogant. At the end of a row of gauzy black and whites, a photograph in sepia, men with faces older than their clothes. 1893 inked on the mat. The priest had the uncoverable pallor of men who never bound hay. He wore his hair close, not by fashion but because it had learned better. His mouth, when at rest, did not make the line most mouths make. He looked like a man practicing silence as pride. The caption in pen steadied itself. Father Silas Vane, Missioner. She did not reach for the frame. She kept her hands where he could see them. Families keep names, he said, as if indulging a child. Orders keep rules. Thirst keeps us honest. You promised you wouldn't make us promises, she said. I promised I would not sell you a cure, he said. He looked at her then in a way that felt like a confession given for purposes other than absolution. You of all people should understand night. You take light into a dark box and bathe paper in fluids that change what it remembers. Silver loves blood. So does story. So do we. She stepped back because the room had become the wrong size. I'm bringing my father, she said, surprising herself with the we in it. Not to your bowl. To a pew. Bring him, he said. The old wood misses men who know how to sit. Sister Ruth appeared in the doorway, small and unarguable. Father, she said, a single syllable filled with an order he would only be able to disobey by admitting to something he hadn't yet dared. It's time to sleep. It's always time to sleep, he said, and for the first time since he arrived in the parish he sounded briefly like a man who remembers dawn. Outside, Caleb handed Tomas a sugar packet and told him to put it under his tongue like a man who had learned medicine in parking lots. The boy grimaced and obeyed. The river did its breath noise. Maddie's diner threw a tired rectangle on the far side of Maine. The town had taught its winter to be civilized, and winter humored it. Mara stood on the church steps with her camera in her bag, and her hands empty, and understood that there is a moment in any story when you are supposed to choose between looking and touching. She had not chosen. The night chose for her. It got colder. She walked home not because home was a sanctuary, it wasn't, but because it had a kettle and a shelf of mugs that remembered her grip. She lit the burner, turned the dial like a rosary, and placed an index card on the table with nothing written on it. You can't make a rule until you know which part of your mouth needs saving. Chapter 4. The Cup and the Thorn. It rained the way February rains along a river that owns your maps. Thin, cold, smelling of tin. The day sat on the town like a lid. Maddie said it was good sleeping weather. Men in boots said it was injury weather. The care home called to inform Mara that her father had told 3 nurses to quit babying the drain, which meant he felt like himself. Sister Ruth left a message on Mara's phone consisting only of a verse, John 19 verse 34. Because nuns trust you to go find what you've been told. One of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. By dusk, the sky had polished itself down to just enough light to be rude. Mara drove to the rectory on a pretext she hadn't rehearsed. The kitchen window was lit. The curtain made a rectangle of domesticity nobody wants to call beautiful. When she knocked at the back door, the smell that came out was tea and bleach and, beneath, because the nose respects its own gossip, the remembered iron. Father Vane opened in his shirt sleeves. The sleeves had been rolled with the particular offense of men who pretend not to notice their own wrists. He held a coffee cup the way a man holds a small animal he expects to forgive him. The bruise at the quick of his right index nail had worsened, or she had learned to see it. "I can bring my father," she said without introduction. "Not to your bowl. To the pew." "Bring him," he said, and she hated him a little, because you cannot fight a man using your sentence as his own. He remembers Wood. Wood remembers him. "Are you going to stop?" she said. "After Lent. After your numbers reverse. After Sister Ruth forgets how to pray politely." He sipped his tea and had the decency to wince. "You are asking the wrong question," he said. "Ask whether anyone will be thirstier after I leave." "Missioners don't leave towns less thirsty," she said.
"Some do," he said.
"Most do not. Nearly all leave towns honest about their thirst. That counts." "Your ring," she said. He smiled without lifting his eyes. "Put it down a well if it helps," he said. "Throw it in the river. I won't chase it." "Men always say that before they go get exactly what they dropped," she said. He laughed, small and brief, the human in it unhelpful. "You remind me of someone," he said. "She taught me to stop kissing books because it made congregations nervous." "Listen to her," she said, not caring who she was. "And don't put a drop of anything in that bowl you wouldn't put in the mouth of a child you couldn't afford to lose." He tipped his head in acknowledgement. "Would you like to bless my tea?" he asked mildly. "It's the only cup I intend to use before bed." It should have made her angrier. It settled the night enough that she could step into it. "I'll bring him at 11, she said, and he bowed slightly, as if she had given him a compliment rather than a condition. Back at the care home, Ray insisted on walking to the car. 3 months ago, he would have made it to the curb. Tonight, he made it a dozen steps down the hall and took the chair they kept by the fish tank for men remembering stairs. Caleb appeared, how men appear when small towns have agreed to share him, and took the handles, light as though he were bringing a friend to a ball game. "Evening, Mr. Moran," he said. "Nice night for religion." "Every night is nice for someone's religion," Ray said. "What are we saving this time? Souls or roofs?" "Throats," Mara said before Caleb could lie. St. Bart's made space the way a good grandmother does, without making you feel it. The pew near the aisle had always had a squeak. It squeaked for Ray and then submitted. He put both hands on the back of the bench in front of him and left them there, as if they could steal something back into themselves. People made the domestic noises rooms permit when they believe they are private. A cough, a zipper, the rub of wool. Sister Ruth slid into the pew ahead, turned once to place a palm on Ray's knuckles, and returned her eyes to the sanctuary like a soldier discovering that the field always starts at your own feet. The little bell admitted the hour. Father Vane came from the side aisle again. Cassock, cincture, no borrowed jewelry. He did not carry the ampulla. It sat already at the lip of the bowl like a testimony that prefers not to take the stand. He lifted it in both hands, not making theater of it, not explaining. The drop hit the surface. The black went out clean. He did not preach. He told a story, the way you tell a child why this food is on his plate. "My mother kept chickens," he said. "In winter they would forget water meant more than reflection. You had to break the skim and show them your finger was wet, and then they remembered to drink. You can mock a bird for that. Or you can notice the part in yourself that loves the way light looks more than you love what it touches." He touched the bowl. He lifted across. "I am not here to sell you light." He worked. The ring did not glint because it was gone. His hand at the nape held a gentleness that could have made him rich at a hospital where they teach men who've never held children how to hold people about to sleep for surgery. The burr was gone. The water stayed black. People exhaled in a way that admitted they had been holding their breath all week. And still, because you cannot ask a story to behave when you've taught it an audience, the wrongness arrived, not as spectacle, but as arithmetic. Halfway down the line, Evelyn Callahan's sister swayed and sat. Maddie, having arrived on the pretext of lighting a candle for a cousin who did not exist, materialized with a paper cup of juice and the confidence of women who rename syncope not enough breakfast and live. Tomas stepped forward and, before he could kneel to the ritual that didn't require kneeling, put a hand to his hairline like a boy remembering a mother's warning about stitches. Vane's hand hovered, and then, because hunger can be obedient if it is fed other ways, touched crown, not nape.
No bur. No bait.
Still the black held its property. Mara watched the ampulla the way a dog watches the hand that feeds other dogs. After the fifth head, he put the lid on it and set it farther from the edge of the bowl, as if to pretend it had not been complicit. On the linen, a ring of damp made a dark geometry, halo dishonest by half. She stood when he finished because hard things require witnesses in motion. "Sister," she said, and Ruth turned with the speed of a small bird reorienting in air. "You were right." The nun looked at the bowl and made the small face the church reserves for mysteries it will have to pass off as metaphors in committees. "I am too old to wrestle with what doesn't give me its name," she said, "but I can pick up the corners." They crossed to the font like women crossing a road they had salted themselves. Vane stood where a priest stands when he is pretending to be incidental, half-turned, looking like a man who would welcome instruction in anything except how to be what he is. "Father," Sister Ruth said, "the ampulla." "A gift," he said simply, "from a friend in the desert." "What desert makes water black?" Ruth asked. "The one where men forget their mouths are animals," he said, and she, God bless the audacity of older women, snorted once by mistake. "Don't get pretty with me," she said. He bowed. There was something like contrition in it, something like respect, something like tactics. "Sister," he said, "if you want me to pour nothing, I will pour nothing." "It's not what you pour," she said. "It's what you need." "You say that like you've never needed anything in your life," he answered, and she laughed, a small miracle of surrender. "I've needed my mouth to behave when men were foolish," she said. "That is the sacrifice the Lord has most loved from me." He smiled at that, not because he'd won, but because the sentence had invited him to be human. He turned his eyes to Ray. "Mr. Moran," he said softly, "I am in debt to your shelf." Ray looked up without turning his head. Men in chairs don't waste necks. "It's a shelf," he said. "It holds, like a good sentence. Are you going to stop making people weep at midnight?" "No," Vane said, and for once it sounded less like arrogance than like accuracy. "Then do it in daylight for a week and see who comes," Ray said. "Midnight makes liars out of both the thirsty and the men who feed them." Vane considered that with the seriousness of a man who doesn't mind being corrected by furniture. "Sister," he said, "shall we move next Monday forward an hour?" "Or back 12, she said crisply. "No more secrecy disguised as intimacy. Baptize the thirsty at noon and see who shows up." He nodded. "At noon," he said toward the nave. "Next week. So the people who make the town move have a chance to be honest without costing themselves sleep." The words rolled out and lay neatly on pewbacks. People picked them up and tried them on silently. Noon is a different courage. After the dispersal, after the hush chatter, after Doyle had carried a basin off and Maddie had taken a woman by the elbow in that way that disguises help as gossip, after Tomas had let Caleb drive him home because boys are wise when they've run out of damaged bravery, Mara found herself again in the sacristy corridor looking at the old pictures. She stood alone until she wasn't. He came softly, because all predators have learned courtesy. "You are going to take a picture," he said, not cruelty, curiosity. "I'm not a journalist," she said. "I don't owe anybody a photograph." "You owe the room the mercy of being described," he said. "Photography is one way. Litany is another." "You have your litany," she said. "I have mine," he said. "Do you intend eternal life?" she asked, because the title of the story deserves to be said out loud so it can be defended from marketing. "I intend to remember as many of you as I can carry," he said. "That is the only eternity I'm permitted." She wanted, briefly, stupidly, to put her hand on his wrist and tell him to go sleep near a window like a dog, so the sun could iron him obedient. "Noon," she said. "We'll see." "Bring your father," he said, and she said nothing because she had trained her mouth to refuse second invitations. On the steps, Caleb looked at his notebook like a man trying to decide whether to write poetry for a report. "He moved it to noon," he said, surprised at his own good mood. Either that's a trick or he's a trick that learned an honest habit. "He knows thresholds," she said. "He knows where to stand. He knows how to make a cup behave." "What's in the cup?" he asked, and her silence, made his shoulders reassess their job. Black water, she said, from a desert that pretends it has nothing to do with a river. Christ, he said softly. Eventually, she said. They stood together and watched three old men argue in good humor about whether the top of the steps had frozen. Someone laughed, and it didn't run away. The town had the look towns get for 1 hour between midnights in February, when they're ashamed of their own appetite and proud of what they fed it instead. In bed, Ray Moran slept with his mouth open and did not apologize. Sister Ruth removed the ampulla from the sacristy, not because she intended to throw it in the river, but because she knew where the parish safe was and used keys like prayers. Father Silas washed his hands at the rectory sink longer than you need to, the water running clear, and then not, and then clear again. The linen over the bowl dried with a darkness around its lip that would, in the morning, look almost like embroidery. Mara lay on the sofa in her father's house and let the radiator teach her the song of heat. She did not dream photographs. She dreamed a child being shown how to drink, finger wet, beak bumping porcelain, learning that reflection is not enough. When she woke before dawn, she put her hand on the table and felt the grain answer like a small, stubborn liturgy. Noon, she told it, because would like schedules. Noon, she told herself, because noon likes liars less than midnight ever will. Chapter 5, Noon, as if the sun were a witness. By midweek, the flyers had learned to speak for themselves. Doyle tacked them where men find instructions, at the hardware counter and the bulletin board at the Milturn warehouse where pallets learned religion. Vigil of the Thirsty, Monday at noon. No clip art, no flourish. Sister Ruth insisted on a font that made nobody feel sold. At the diner, Maddie set one by the pie case where lemon meringue could glare at it. The care home pinned two, one in activities, one in the hall where a man named Leon rolled his chair up to signs and memorized them the way boys learn baseball stats. A woman who never went to church folded the corner of her copy and set it in the family calendar, not because she intended to go, but because noon can put manners on even the skeptical. Monday delivered a February sun that acted like a good boy, bright, obedient to angles, useless for warmth. St. Bart's looked less Gothic and more municipal under it. The stained glass, accustomed to flattering dusk, cast reckless colors over the nave in rectangles you could stand in like a promise if you wanted. Children know to stand in color. The men in work jackets pretended not to notice. Mara parked in front because you forget how to be shy when you are escorting a man who taught the pews what weight meant. Ray Moran refused the chair in the vestibule with the confidence of a man who has earned the luxury of being disobeyed. He took her arm and the rail and the slowness like a blessing parents once forced on bedtime. "You didn't bring me to see a miracle," he said at the top step. "Say you didn't." "I brought you to see people be honest at the wrong hour," she said. "If a miracle happens, you can glare at it." He laughed once, those small coins left in a coat pocket from a winter that hadn't been terrible. Caleb met them at the aisle end and took up his post by virtue of being a man shaped like a threshold. The noon crowd looked different. Fewer old coats damp at the cuffs, more work jackets with a company name stitched on the breast. 3 women in scrubs. A teenage girl with her backpack on, hair braided in defiance of her mother's plea to wear a hat. Tomas tucked his violin case under the pew as if St. Bart's had always kept instrument storage. Sister Ruth sat with her hands flat on her knees, as if to show them to God before he could accuse her of withholding. Father Vane came the same way, from the side aisle, cassock shifting like a shadow, learning to live in polite light. Noon made him less handsome, which Mara counted as a mercy. He was not a man who thrived under honest angles. The collar faulted his throat in the crude way white does against pale men. When he stepped forward, a ray through the south transept glass caught his right hand, back of it full on. He did not jerk, he corrected. The movement was small, like removing a finger from a too-hot cup. He wrapped a purificator over the knuckles with a speed that practiced generosity toward pain. It was nothing. It was everything. He did not preach. He told a story anyway, because noon requires a different cadence. In the heat of the day, the woman at the well went out to be alone with her chores, he said. No good woman drew at noon. No decent man brought his thirst to a public place. We will offend both good women and decent men today. We will tell the truth where the sun can hear." He lifted the ampulla from the lip of the bowl and found only porcelain beneath his reaching hand. The muscle in his jaw put on a new habit and then remembered the old one. He set his palm on the marble and said the public blessing without an undertext. The water, if water, held itself clear, as if flattered and bored by daylight. Mara saw Sister Ruth's mouth loosen a degree. Keys clink softly in a pocket when a thing has been moved to a safe. Doyle folded his hands in the way usher hands do when they mean to remind a priest we can behave. He began. Touch, wet, words, touch, wet, words. The hand at the crown gentle, the hand at the nape careful. No burr to kiss skin, the ring finger naked. The room's breaths answered in a rhythm that admitted this was not the same. Relief, yes. The particular shiver that had sent Tomas sprinting into February without a coat. No. Men's shoulders went down a notch in a way a chiropractor would have admired. A girl raised her chin after the water as if she had been taught a decent insult. Sun pooled in stained glass colors on the floor. Children straddled red and green. Men pretended stone wasn't trying to write their ankles in blue. Noon gives you away even when you behave. The dust in the air learned to confess. When Ray's turn came, he did not go up. He sat with his hands on the pew back in front of him and refused politely. Mara loved him for it and wished she had his patience for refusing. Sister Ruth glanced back and offered a small nod that read, "You are not a lesser thing because you brought wood instead of your head." Father Vane's eyes flicked toward them, not in challenge, in inventory. The ledger in his face wanted to make a neat column. Ray refused to be a neat column. Halfway through, the sun moved. It does at noon.
Aslan surprise.
A gold bar fell through the clear story onto the plane of his hands. The purificator did its domestic work. The priest's skin under it whitened the way uncallous men do when they discover labor too late. He did not yelp. He breathed. Mara's camera felt heavy in the bag. She laid a palm on it as if soothing a restless animal. Evelyn Callahan's sister did not faint. Tomas did not touch the old hurt at his hairline. Maddie stood in a column of color and held her mouth still until the line in it unclenched. Caleb watched the door. Noon teaches policemen a different vigilance. The guilty walk right in. When the line was done, he did the old gesture of blessing, and this time finished it. The sign of the cross over a room full of people willing to be mocked by the honest angle of day. At night we pretend to be better or worse than we are, he said. At noon, we are exactly our size. Go in peace. Keep your mouths if you can. There was laughter in it. Mercy sometimes hides in ridiculous places. People shuffled. Work jackets headed toward sandwiches. Scrubs stared at watches and lied to supervisors by habit. Ray leaned back with a satisfied groan like a pew that had done its job. Thin at noon, he said. Better for a town. Worse for sales. Mara waited and learned Noon's secret. Rooms are honestest in dispersal. She saw the way Vane moved his shoulder to not let sunlight land on it. She saw the glove of cloth settle over his hand as if he had agreed with it beforehand that at noon they must be formal. She saw, when he turned to lift the linen collar over the bowl, the smallest shadow at his temple like a bruise under milk. And she saw, on the white folded cloth he used to dry the marble lip, a faint rosiness that had not come from the bowl. She stepped into the sacristy before he had time to make theater.
"You're bleeding," she said.
Or the cloth is. It's a day for small truths, he said. He took the purificator off his hand and looked at it with the fond annoyance of a man whose shirt has betrayed his breakfast. On the back of his right hand, 2 blanched ovals where sun had found, and between them a faint stipple, half moons of something dilated to the surface by involuntary heat. Burns, she said. From colors. An interesting failure for a man who lives on symbol. Glass lies less than ink, he said. He put the cloth down. On the edge, where he'd clamped it, a blush even Noon would dignify as pink. Not enough to scandalize. Enough to confess. I did not pour, he added, and she heard the plea in it and understood she was meant to applaud. You still drank, she said. From some part of the room, you have taught to be your mouth. He considered lying and found that Noon would not sponsor it. There are habits you do not end in public, he said. You soften them until they can be ended for real. You took it from the cloth, she said, or from the fog of the bowl, or from the sore at the quick of your nail. I don't care which organ you trained to be a cup. Is your father comfortable? He said, and the cruelty in it was tiny and effective because he made it sound like a favor. She stood very still because there are thresholds you step over once and discover a court has been convened, and you are the one without a lawyer. Do not say my father's name when you are hungry, she said. His mouth did a small thing. Repentance on men looks like humor that forgot itself. There is a way to keep him, he said softly. It isn't pretty, and God would call me to account for it, and so would your conscience when you woke in 4 years to a man who did not die because he had learned a different thirst, but I could keep him. We can have that conversation, or we can have another. I am asking you to choose which temptation will be yours to carry. Don't put theology in my mouth when what you mean is blood, she said, and her voice was flat in the middle in a way that surprised even her. Noon is good for me. It keeps me from pretending I enjoy being tempted. He leaned against the cupboard her father had built and did a small thing no one expects of monsters. He let the cupboard take his weight like a man who remembers being allowed to be tired. The bruise at his nail bed, earlier dark, had lightened. Heat does that to old clots. He flexed the hand, watched the tendons. Noon makes me stupid, he admitted. It also makes me kind. Your father was right. Midnight makes a liar out of appetite. Noon is an honest fast. Then keep it, she said. And when you cannot, go to the river and put your head in it and let it make its case. You think I don't, he said, not offense. You think I haven't swallowed that water so many times it knows my name without writing. Your ledger knows your name, she said. Do not be charmed by baptisms you give yourself. Sister Ruth's shoes spoke on the sacristy floor, leather that has learned to mind linoleum. She looked at Mara, then at the cloth, then at his right hand where the blanch marked the color's discipline. He needs gloves, she said dryly, and the courage to be plain. No more ampulla, Mara said. It's in the safe, Ruth replied, where God keeps the money men give him for roofs. If he can tolerate that blasphemy, he can manage a bottle he didn't ask to bless. Vane bowed to her the way a man bows to a woman he has no chance about sinning. Sister, he said, and there was affection in it, and something like gratitude a child feels toward a schoolmistress who, in beating him, taught him grammar. Out in the nave, Ray let his hand fall from the pew back to his lap and looked at the way light had moved on the floor. At noon there are fewer places to be a coward, he said to Caleb. The difference between fewer and none is where men live. Caleb wrote the sentence down in his notebook where he'd meant to put no incidents, noon successful, fewer nosebleeds, and drew a line under it because you have to keep track of good lines or they'll go back to being air. When they stepped into the bright cold, the town had that slight hangover it gets from honesty. Men in jackets smoked without pretending it was about friendship. Women made promises to themselves about afternoons. The river looked pointless and inevitable. Mara took her father's arm. He winced once, not from pain, from formality. You'll keep going, he said. I haven't yet decided whether I am a witness or an accomplice, she said. Witnesses are accomplices who keep better notes, he said, because fathers are allowed one sentence per week that reminds you why your mouth is shaped like his. That night, she poured boiling water over a bag of something that called itself mint and wrote on an index card 2 truths you cannot say into a priest's kitchen. He burns.
He tempts.
She put the card under the salt cellar as if weight could make a rule stick. She slept with a window cracked like a dare to color. Chapter 6. The Thorn and the Safe. Sister Ruth went to the safe because obedience lives next to distrust in women who survive institutions. After Compline, which she prayed alone in the convent sitting room because the others had been folded into other towns generations ago, she took the bunch of keys no bishop had bothered to list and walked across the ice-rubbed sidewalk to the church. The sacristy at night smelled less like God and more like brass. She kneeled not to pray, knees cracked anyway, and turned the clumsy dial because habit learns what numbers a parish trusts. The door opened on the meek. That is what safes keep. Money that would have bought soup, papers that would have explained kindness, objects men imagine will be braver behind doors. The ampulla was not on the bottom shelf, where she had set it among old chalice veils retired for false lace. The space it had occupied had dust disturbed in the shape of a bottle that would rather be adjective than noun.
She breathed.
She did not say Jesus. She had spent that name already twice today and prefers not to cheapen it. She closed the door and spun the dial and stood until the panic had evaporated into the linen cabinet in the corner. Then she went to the rectory by the back path, where priests go outside to decide whether to answer the door. He opened without a preface and stood half a step aside to show she was not in danger there. Men who have used danger as a wage learn that courtesy late. The kitchen smelled like steam and steel and nothing else. On the table, at a proper distance from a cup, sat the ampulla. There was no smirk to it, no flare of theatrical shadow under a light. It had learned to behave like a bottle between services. "You took it," Ruth said flatly. "I did not plan to deny it," he said. "You took it with a key you were not given," she said. "Or without one, which is worse." "I took it because you locked a habit in a box," he said. "You cannot put appetite in a safe and expect it to yield to a dial. If I am to break it, I must do so without pretending the breaking is a trick I do by denying the existence of the thing." "You took it because noon was thin," she said. "I took it because I have not fasted long enough," he said. "And because men came to my door after supper with mouths I will not shame by naming. The old ones, sister. The ones who remember a winter with nothing in the pantry but tins they kept for war and pride."
"They can eat soup," she said.
"They can," he said.
"Soup is one thing.
To be held and told your name is another. I have traded on that too long, I know. I am trying to distinguish medicine from sugar." She stood at the table the way she used to stand before choir girls who refused to learn their thirds. "Where did you get it?" she asked at last, because provenance is how you discipline relics. "A desert," he said. "Not the holy one tired men go to when they've decided to write pamphlets. A particular blistered place my house was once sent to convert, and was converted by in return. A spring that runs under basalt and remembers blood thrown there by men who did not know the names of their enemies. A woman, do not make that face at me, a sister who took in orphans of plague, sent it to me with a note that said, 'We cannot keep this. It makes the girls' lips dark and the men sleep without breath and wait, and I do not like the way the dogs wait by the fence after Compline.'" "You kept a curse," Ruth said. "I kept a recipe," he said. "Water and a story and a drop of a thing you insist on calling sin, because that is the only word our vocabulary provides." She reached, and to his credit or his calculation, he did not prevent her. She lifted the ampulla by the neck with finger and thumb. The weight was wrong for a thing that had caused so much conversation. The glass had been worked long ago by hands that did not take pride in symmetry. The black within did not cling to its prison. It held itself, as if reminded of its dignity daily. She set it down gently, like a live thing. "You pour," she said. "It answers."
"I pour," he said.
"It uses my hand to remember what the town would like to forget, that blood and water are the same word when you are dying." She pulled out a chair and sat because the conversation was not going to find an end standing. He waited, a man who had learned to appear patient in the presence of women he could neither argue with nor seduce. "In the winter of 1893, she said, "the ledger has entries written in a hand the town did not train. A priest who looks like your grandfather's grandfather. A mission. A vigil. Then nothing. The men at the mill had white at their temples before they had sons. Your bones remember him," he said, not triumph. "So does your church. The shelf that holds the albs. The way the floorboards ease under a certain gate. I did not invent this town's habit. I came to be devoured by it and learned to be greedy instead." She did what women do when they don't plan to be charmed. She picked up the nearest domestic object and inspected it like a relic. A spoon.
"Clean."
She put it down. "I moved the bottle because I do not like watching boys put their hands to their heads and feel a ring that isn't there. I do not like that the water keeps its color no matter how many foreheads take it. I do not like that you smell like a kiss after Massachusetts." He laughed once, scandalized by the accurate mercy of it. "Sister," he said, "Jesus himself would have taken your class on Thursdays for fear you would mark his papers." "I would," she said. "He would bring his own pencil and behave." They heard it then. The thing a rectory hears when it is still owned by a parish with enough people left to cast shadows. A car door, the polite slam of good manners, the back steps complaining the way middle-aged would complain. Mara did not knock. She came in as far as the doormat and waited. "You keep turning rooms into courts," she said.
Fine.
"We'll find a judge later. Tonight, I want to know who you visited." He looked genuinely puzzled, which is either the best or the worst confession. "You will have to be more specific," he said. "My day began at a hospital and ended at a desk where I wrote letters to men who never write back." "Mrs. Finn," Caleb said from the porch where he had learned how to pretend to be large without being loud. He stepped into the kitchen because he had been invited once by an older priest and cannot unlearn permission. "You went to Mrs. Finn's after dark. She called me. She said she had never had a priest sit in her kitchen and make her look like she had a future. I told her that's the normal thing. She said she fell asleep sitting up and woke without her heart saying, 'Oh no,' at her first thought. And then, an hour ago, she called again and said she had a taste in her mouth like chewing on a penny." "She is dying," Vane said simply. "You know it. The doctor knows it. She knows it more than all of us. I sat with her because the last time I visited she cried and said, 'Father, they only put their hands on me to move me or to mean kindness, and I don't know how to be touched without debt anymore.' So I touched a widow's hand like a person who had not come for a fee. She slept. She woke and did not panic. And yes, I touched my mouth because bodies are still bodies under collars." Caleb stood with his hands in his pockets and did a thing priests do not expect of cops. He looked more tired for the explanation, not less. "I don't care what you call it," he said. "You invent a right out of a hunger. You do it without hurting people on purpose, and when you hurt them by accident you admit it first." "I have admitted it 7 times today," Vane said, unwounded by the count. "I will make an 8th if it buys Sister Ruth sleep." "Admit it in public," Mara said. "At noon.
No ampulla.
No ring. No touching your mouth. If the town is thirsty, let it be thirsty for something that isn't going to ask for rent at 3 in the morning." He nodded once, the smallest authority yielding to a rule the room had written for him, without quorum. "Done," he said. "And the bottle," Sister Ruth said, hand on the neck like a mother restraining a toddler. "It goes back where men put their mistakes." "It goes," he said, "to the river." They looked at one another as if they had set a scandal. He smiled at the degree to which he had shocked himself. "Not as theater," he added. "As honesty." "You can't throw it in the river," Mara said softly. "That's where he lives," and realized she'd said, "he the way children do, who have learned their town is a person." "You're not wrong," Vane said. "But if the town is going to keep a reliquary, it should do it where it can watch it. The river is better at that than a safe. You throw a thing in the river and boys will find it when they decide to dare each other proper," Caleb said. "You want a 14-year-old to be a priest without understanding liturgy." "We bury it," Sister Ruth said, as if concluding class, "in the cemetery, which is the church's only honest elbow of the river. We bury it under a stone that says nothing but the year. We tell no one who did it, and we make replacements for the linen collar of the bowl until the stain on this one fades." "Agreed," Vane said, unexpected relief in the word. They went out together because this sort of pact hates ceilings. The cemetery crouched up against the church's south wall, the stones jacketed in lichen, the angels' toes furred with moss. The ground was soft-browed. Caleb carried a shovel because policemen own shovels in towns where dogs go missing. Sister Ruth brought a trowel more accustomed to violets. Vane carried the ampulla wrapped in a linen purificator that would later scandalize someone in the sacristy who couldn't be told the story. Mara carried a flashlight even though the moon had decided to behave tonight. They chose a spot by instinct and superstition, between 2 stones whose names had stopped being read aloud except by granddaughters. They dug shallow because winter scold shovels. Vane set the ampulla in the hole with the tenderness of men who have not confessed they want to cry at the sight of babies. Ruth refilled the hole with the finality nuns bring to everything they choose. Caleb tamped down the earth like a man who knows how to make a grave look like a lawn. Mara aimed the beam, counted to 20 out of spite, counted to 3 out of mercy, and shut it down. "Now tell them at noon what you did," she said to Vane. "Tell them you broke a habit and buried it like a sin you didn't enjoy." "I will," he said, and for the first time since he'd come he sounded like a young man who had put on a coat too large for his shoulders and had resolved to grow into it without excuses. They stood among the stones then and practiced the town's oldest rite, listening to the river decide what to forgive. The water made its old iron song. The church's stone learned a new temperature around them. A train said something immodest to the bridge 2 miles away. Noon had taught the town candor. Night could now afford to be decent. At the diner later, Maddie poured coffee without waiting for an order and stared hard at the steam so the room wouldn't make her announce her interest. "Are we done with baptizing cups?" she asked nobody in particular. "We're changing what they mean," Sister Ruth said, "which is all we ever do, 1 century at a time." "Mrs. Finn," Caleb said, and paused to let the name admit dignity. "She's easy tonight. If that's your doing," he added to the priest, "I'll give you credit and write it down not as a sin but as a note." "It is my doing and also the room's and also the age on her bones," Vane said. "I will take 1/3 of the credit and 1/3 of the blame, and the last third belongs to a river I did not teach to sing." Mara did not drink her coffee. She wrapped her hands around the cup to remind them they belonged to her. "At noon," she said, "you'll say it. The burying. The not pouring. The not kissing." "At noon," he said, "I will tell the truth in the angle that makes me least impressive." And at midnight, Ray asked from a booth nobody had seen him occupy. He did that, appearing where would knew him. "What becomes of your appetite then?" Vane looked at him and smiled a tired smile that belongs to priests and fathers and men who've quit beautiful things too late. "It learns," he said, "or it kills me. Those are the 2 religions left." "You pick the first," Ray said. "I'll help hold your head toward it." The town laughed a little at that because survival likes gallows humor even when there's no gallows in sight. Outside, the moon denied its involvement. Under a square of earth among names that had learned to be verbs, glass dreamed of water it would not touch again, and the river, polite, pretended not to watch. Chapter 7. Confession at Noon. They came on their lunch hours with mouths that smelled of coffee and apology. The flyer had done its modest work. No clip art, no flourish, just the hour and the promise that the thirsty would not be asked to lose sleep to be honest. Work jackets, scrubs, 2 men with paint on their knuckles, a girl still wearing her backpack in front like armor. The stained glass, flattered by day for once, cast rectangles across the nave like quilts laid down for a nap no one would take. Ray Moran sat in the 3rd pew from the back and insisted on the aisle. He put one hand on the bench in front of him and left it there as if the wood owed him change. Caleb stood in the narthex, where doors practiced being polite. Sister Ruth took the far end of the 1st pew, like a chaperone who had learned to love the dance and still knew when to clear her throat. Tomas slid his violin case under the seat and stared at the floor with the unbearable concentration of boys who can't think unless they're pretending they aren't. Father Vane entered from the side, cassock, cincture, no jewelry. Noon had a way of making men the size they actually were. He looked human in it. Too pale, too precise. Favorite shirt ironed by a man, not a steamer. A purificator was wrapped, folded, over the back of his right hand like a gentleman's concession. He stood by the bowl and did not touch it. "No epigraph," he said, voice gentled for rooms that must return to forklifts and charts. "No verse to make this pretty. I did a thing I loved more than was good for you. I poured something into a memory to make it stronger than it needed to be. I taught your mouths a habit I am asking you to unlearn." The room didn't flinch. Noon teaches rooms not to indulge melodrama. He set his left hand, unwrapped, on the marble rim and looked out over the assembled mouths as if he were about to take attendance. "Sometimes a priest keeps a relic because he is afraid the room will forget what saved it once," he said. "Sometimes he falls in love with watching relief land on faces. Sometimes he confuses being necessary with being good. Last night we buried a bottle in the churchyard. Sister Ruth chose the hole. Officer Price tamped the earth like a lawn. Ms. Moran held the light and counted to 20, so we should have the dignity of a small ritual. We put the thing in the ground with no prayer, because not every ending needs to be canonized. A stir moved like weather overheads, not scandal, satisfaction. There is a pleasure old people take in hearing that something has finally been put away. I don't know how to be your shepherd without wanting to be adored by your thirst, he said, plain enough that even men who hate adjectives could stand it. So I will do this instead. Water, the word, the breath. I will not kiss anything but the book. I will not pour anything I would not give a child who cannot afford to be further wronged. If you see me touch my mouth, ring the bell. He turned the purificator on his right hand over once, as if reminding his own skin it had been a fool. Noon struck its slant. The glass threw a gold bar at his knuckles, and he accepted the heat with the smallest correction, not a flinch. A man learning to carry an honest cup. He did not reach for an ampulla. There was none to reach for. He said the public blessing the book gives to men who can read. The water stayed itself, clear, bored, a little offended by the attention. They came. A carpenter whose shoulders had always looked like he'd been sleeping under a porch. A nurse who had cried at a birth and been told by a woman with a clipboard to please take it outside. A teenager who refused to let her mouth learn a line today. Touch, wet, words.
No bite.
The hand at the nape gentle but unambitious. He didn't look saved. He looked employed. Maddie stepped into a square of cobalt on the flagstones and lifted her chin as if she were volunteering for something petty and important, like telling the truth about pie. He laid a cross on her hair, as if not to mess it. He kept his other hand where Noon could see it. She exhaled in a voice a boss couldn't use against her later. Tomas stood so quickly he banged his knee on the pew and said sorry to the bench, as if it could hear him. When Vane reached for the boy's head, he stopped himself mid-gesture, corrected, and touched only the crown. No nail at the quick.
No burr.
The boy's mouth opened a degree and closed. He didn't bolt. He went back to his case and, like a man discovering he may be allowed to keep a third of what he loves, took out the violin and played one note, very quietly, as if asking the room if it would scold. It did not. Sister Ruth's mouth softened, which is a permission old women hand out with stingy elegance. Ray did not go forward. He pressed his palm to the pew ahead and let the bench translate his name into wood. When the line ended and the blessing fell, the honest, public one that is mostly a sign of exit, Ray lifted his hand and spoke without standing. At midnight, he said, "You told us we were beautiful. At noon you told us you were wrong. I'm more likely to come to the second." Laughter, not cheap. Vane smiled in a way that made him less interesting and more bearable. "Come to both," he said. "We will try to get better at the second." He could have dismissed them. Instead, he did the thing nobody expects of priests who look like calendars. He opened the floor. "If this harmed you," he said, "if an extra thirst took root in your sleep because of me, say it. So I can carry it where I can be embarrassed into stopping." Evelyn Callahan's sister stood, unglamorous as a broom against a door. "I liked the midnight," she said. "I liked waking up and not wanting the wrong snack. I did not like the way my gums felt like they'd remembered something they weren't supposed to. I don't intend to have that feeling again." "Then we'll feed you soup and a sleeping pill," Maddie said from her square of blue, and the room got to laugh because kindness sometimes dresses as sarcasm for safety. A man in a company jacket with 4 stitched letters on the chest, GRR, the warehouse, grunted once to get his courage in order.
Felt like the flu, he said.
Wanted to run. Didn't. I like noon. I like going back to work, not thinking I might afford a worse idea at 3. Sister Ruth turned her head a fraction, the nod that takes attendance among the living. She stood. "There are rules now," she said, which is how nuns say we've done enough improvisation for one season.
No ampullas.
No jewelry with burrs. No touching your mouth. If your head wants to be flirted with after the cross, you come to me and I'll put a cool cloth on your neck like an ant. If anyone is thirsty at midnight and cannot help it, You call the rectory, and Father will make tea and steal you a nap, which is all most of you needed all along. In the back, the bell rope swayed in a draft, and the brass bell made one small coin sound at the wrong time. The room smiled. A rule had been posted without a meeting, and everyone had heard it. After, when the crowded noon softened into the quieter business of going back to be useful, Mara did the thing she had been refusing to do for a week. She took one picture. The lens coughed once, no flash, and the frame held what she intended it to hold. Sister Ruth's open hand, Ray's knuckles resting on the pew, the purificator like a bandage on the back of a priest's hand, the bowl refusing to be dramatic. It was the least impressive photograph she had taken in years. She had the immediate, guilty knowledge that it was one she'd keep. Outside, the town had that rinse-lip places get when someone has opened a window without asking. Men smoked on the sidewalk as if smoke were a way to take back control of their mouths. Caleb stood with his notebook and didn't write, which means a policeman is off-duty in public. Vane came down the steps last, no heroism in it, just a man aware of edges. He shook Ray's hand. He did not wince, he learned. "You'll want to sleep," Ray said, as if telling him where the hammer was. "I'm learning," Vane said. "Good," said Ray. "We like men who learn where we can watch." That night, nobody rang the rectory bell. 2 people called. Sister Ruth told them sternly to try chamomile first. Tomas practiced until 10, not midnight, and headed home with his hat on, and a face that looked like a boy who had discovered he could want better things and still be himself. Maddie took down the flyer and penciled in noon next week without asking permission. At 2 in the morning, a widow woke and put her hand on her own chest and did not panic. Somewhere a dog stopped waiting at a fence. In the rectory, a man washed his hands and stood by an open window like a person who has chosen a less beautiful habit and intends to make it permanent. Chapter 8. The Night Without Tricks. The first Monday night without the vigil felt like a dare you plan to ignore. The church was dark on purpose. Doyle had turned the key with the firmness of a man who likes procedures. He had checked the latch and then, out of superstition, tugged it again. The little brass bell hung quiet in the narthex. The font wore its linen collar like a shawl a widow has learned to enjoy again. The cemetery held its square of turned earth and refused to tell on anyone. You cannot keep a town from inventing a liturgy for absence. People did small things instead. Elena Ortiz boiled bones into a broth as if to make soup sorry for its thinness. Maddie wiped down the diner's pie case twice and told herself she had always stayed open until 11 on Mondays. Sister Ruth sat in the convent parlor and mended a chasuble with stitches, so small they were a kind of prayer. Ray took his pills without an argument and folded his blanket like a man who refuses to be disrespected by wool. Caleb drove slow past the church and pretended to be checking streetlights. Mara walked to the bridge, because the river is honest when buildings are being coy. The town lay in itself like a man asleep on his side, trying not to snore in front of company. She leaned her elbows on cold rail and watched the water write quietly in iron cursive. A boy's footprints darkened the salt. She knew them without seeing his face. "Go home, Tomas," she called into the dark, not unkind. The rail made the small sound rails make when a teenager peels himself off their story. "Okay," came back from the ordinary dark. She didn't try to see if his hat was on. She decided it was, and let that be the reality. Her phone hummed. "Caleb." 2 words, Mrs. Finn. She went with her coat unbuttoned, because the mind forgets weather when an old woman is involved. Mrs. Finn's lights made polite rectangles against tired curtains. The kitchen smelled of tea reheated twice, and good woodwork tired of being thought of only when it needed oiling. Vane sat at the table turned at an angle away from the window, sleeves down, right hand wrapped in a clean white cloth that used to be a purificator and now was simply what it was, something for a wound to lean on. Mrs. Finn's daughter had the shut mouth of women who've been crying with aim. Mrs. Finn herself breathed in those slow, efficient numbers the dying learn, and her eyes were open and not panicked. She did not look saved. She looked held. "I told her a story she knew," Vane said quietly, as if narrating to a stenographer. I put my hand on her forehead the way her mother used to check a fever. I did not bless her. I did not pour. She slept. She woke and said the taste in her mouth was like holding a penny as a child and not being allowed to put it under her tongue. We confessed it together, and it passed. She asked me if God was going to be a gentleman about the draft in heaven. The daughter said, half a laugh outside her choked voice. I told her God is the kind of man who closes a window when asked. They sat in that kitchen the way towns sit in kitchens to keep promises from evicting them. Mara did nothing but listen with her camera face. Everything illuminated, nothing taken. Caleb leaned in the doorway and learned a new posture, a cop without the excuse of a thing to fix. Mrs. Finn looked up, saw all three, and smiled the smile the dying give the living when the living are being decent. You're not going to keep me, she said to the priest, conversational as gossip. No, he said, and the no had in it the fabric of a refusal he had spent too many nights dodging. Good, she said. I don't like women who dye their hair too black or men who don't know how to leave. She closed her eyes again, and they let the room be quiet. When Mrs. Finn's breath went from counted to counted on, after the daughter said the thing daughters always say, she was herself the whole time. After Caleb called the number you call, and the night went about its decent paperwork, Mara and Vane stepped onto the porch because kitchens get small when grief is behaving. I thought you'd go looking for the hole, Mara said into the kind cold, to check if the bottle had learned to dig. It won't, he said. Sister packed the earth like a woman who doesn't tolerate remainders. But you keep thinking about it, she said, because he had the eyes of a man translating a ledger back into Neve. I keep thinking about the way the river looked at me when we walked past, he said, and for once did not try to make the sentence fit a catechism. As if it had decided we weren't talking. Let it sulk, she said. It's good practice for a god. He smiled. You keep thinking I'm likely to do something stupid and beautiful at 3, he said, not offended. I keep thinking you're likely to do something easy at 3, she said. And that easy will be beautiful in your mouth until it kills someone without a name tag. He nodded, tired now in a way that made him tolerable. I won't, he said, and because he was a man and not a vow, he added, tonight. They walked together as far as the church corner out of habit. The stone loved company. Most churches do. In the dark, a figure peeled off the shadow near the cemetery gate. For a second, all three of them, priest, woman, officer, were just animals with hearts. Caleb's hand was on his belt, not at his gun. He keeps his belt for not frightening old ladies. The figure stepped into what passed for light. A man in a jacket with 2 stitched letters on the breast, G. The rest lost to shadow. The warehouse. Brendan Garrity, whose mouth had always looked like it wanted to be corrected by a better habit. I came to see if you put it where a decent man could steal it, Brendan said, not cheerful. Some men try not to be theatrical and fail out of respect for the stage. My mother's hand stopped shaking on Tuesday night because a man poured something old in a bowl. She stopped shaking for the first time in a winter. I don't care what the book calls it. You don't throw that in a hole. We didn't, Sister Ruth said from behind him, which was scarier than if she'd come from heaven. She had the parish lantern in one hand and a shovel in the other, and God forgive the town for how right that looked. We buried a bottle. The thing you want is larger than glass. Brendan flared. You don't get to decide what men love. Neither do you, she said, exactly as patient as a woman with your baptismal record and the good gossip. His face did the thing faces do when they are on the verge of doing something that will require large apologies later. He looked at Vane instead. You promised. I promise nothing, Vane said, sounding truthful and therefore infuriating. I described. I listened. I poured the wrong thing in the right place and got praise for it. I've stopped. Brendan spat. On the ground. Not at anyone. He knows the difference. Then I'll make my own, he said. I know men who bleed when asked. Caleb took one step. His voice was the voice you use when a bar fight is thinking about itself. You'll go home, he said. You'll not ring a single bell that isn't on a cat's collar. You'll not make any boy bleed. You'll not play at priest. Go sleep. Wake ugly. We'll see you at noon with soup like everyone who isn't the problem. The man's jaw worked because obedience is hard when someone has made it sound like manners. He glared at Ruth, who did not move. He looked at Vane, whose hand was still wrapped and who was therefore making no sudden gestures. He looked at Mara, who committed his face to a memory that had iron in it. He did the tenderest thing he was capable of and left before he could become a story people would be told wrong. "Tomorrow," Sister Ruth said, when the dark had stopped rehearsing, "we say it out loud from the ambo. We say what we did with the bottle. We say that if anyone wants a midnight, they can come sit in the kitchen with me and I'll make them tea and tell them stories about being hungry that will embarrass them out of art." "Tea," Vane said. "That's the sacrament." "Tonight," Ruth said, "tea is the sacrament." They didn't sleep much, but they didn't ring bells. In the morning, the town went to work with mouths that had chosen to make do. Brendan Garrity didn't show up for his shift. His supervisor, who had learned to allow men to have days for reasons he didn't put in the line, marked him absent and moved pallets with his own back. At noon, the church was fuller than last Monday. Word of burying a thing makes people come to see where the hole is. Vane did not stall. "We had a bottle," he said, "and we put it away. I loved it. It loved me wrong. If you have a bottle at home you call a friend, bring it to me. We'll bury that too. Soup tonight at the hall. Tea in the convent."
No midnight.
"I'm sorry for the ache I taught your mouths on purpose. I will spend the rest of Lent unbeautiful." He worked the line, touch, wet, words. The room breathed in that new rhythm that wasn't relief so much as elasticity. When he came to a boy in a letterman's jacket who had done something rash to the inside of his wrist and masked it poorly, Vane took both hands, turned them palm up, and said the river psalm in English so boys would not be startled. "You are not a cup." The boy cried, quietly, as if ashamed of the volume of his own heart. Sister Ruth put a hand at the back of his head like an ant, and did not let him invent a new appetite while he was still listening. After, when the benches had given up their weight and the pie case at the diner had reclaimed its audience, when the care home turned on the rash television show old men permit out of habit, and Ray turned it off because he would not have people yelling in his afternoon, when Brendan came by the church and did not come in, when Tomas played 3 measures of something French in a corner and had the sense not to make a show of it, Mara stood again with her hands on the back of a pew and felt would tell her a small useful truth. Habit is a liturgy with a better memory. That night, no one died in a way that frightened them. That is a sentence you don't get to write often. The river made its iron cursive and kept its mouth. A priest, pale as paper and more stubborn, stood at his sink with the window open and practiced uncurling his hand from his own mouth. A nun rinsed a linen collar until the ring around the bowl's lip looked like embroidery instead of what it was. A policeman rewrote a report, crossed out vigil, replaced it with prayers at noon, then crossed that out and wrote people. Mara developed the one picture, Sister's hand, Ray's knuckles, the purificator, the clear bowl, and pegged it with clothespins over her father's kitchen sink. She let the water run and the radiator hum and the town do its slow work of learning how to sleep without tricks. Outside, someone practiced ringing the little brass bell just once, softly, and laughed at how much like a coin it sounded when it chose to be small. Chapter 9. The Thaw. Mrs. Finn's funeral borrowed the noon light and made it do something useful. The sun slipped through the south glass and cut a long, bright sentence across the nave. Every dust mote rehearsed its line and kept it. Vane did not make a production of grief. He spoke the way you speak when you have washed a teacup in the house of the dead and put it upside down to dry. "She slept," he said, which the room translated to "she was not afraid," and he left it there because noon does not sponsor embroidery. After the burial, the town learned a new forecast. Flood watch through Thursday. The river thawed in bands, black between milky shelves. When the sun was out, the ice yielded with a sound like furniture dragged across a floor 2 rooms away. The cemetery crouched as it always had with its shoulder against the church's south wall, pretending it did not hear the undermining. Sister Ruth heard it. Nuns know when ground is being taught to move under them. Late afternoon, she took her mending into the churchyard, sat on the low stone by the Ortiz plot, and picked her stitches like arguments with God. The earth at the fence had slumped, not enough for scandal, enough for attention. She touched the soft place with 3 fingers and felt the willingness in it. What soil has when it wants to be water and has been told to be polite? The square they had made a week ago was not there to be seen, but the ground had learned the shape of it. She stood, joints protesting, and went to find Doyle. "Put a board here," she said, practical as a woman telling a child to hold his plate with 2 hands. "Tonight we get rain." It came at sundown, thin, cold, with the smell of metal shaved fine. By dark the river had raised itself a lazy inch and begun to negotiate with the roots of the maples along the cemetery fence. Mara, who had intended to go home after bringing her father soup, found herself at the bridge because bridges are where you take your fear when you want it to look like a civic errand. The water wrote its iron cursive. The current tugged at the dead weeds along the bank the way a mother tugs a child's sock straight. She could see the church roof, slate-shouldered against the weather. She saw, too, the pinprick of a flashlight moving along the fence line where the graves leaned into the wall. Caleb answered on the first ring. "I'm in the lot," he said. Saw the truck. "Brendan?" she asked, already knowing.
Garrity, he said.
You don't bring a shovel to a flood watch unless you intend to help, and he does not intend to help. They met at the gate where the ground had given up pretending to be hard. Sister Ruth's board lay where she'd ordered it, a plank across the worst of the slump. Brendan stood beyond, 1 foot braced in graveyard grass, 1 in the first insult of mud, his jacket haloed with rain. He had a shovel. He had a bottle-shaped hole already started beside the spot where they had not marked the spot. Men can smell the stories you bury. You don't get to put it in the ground and call it yours, he said, without greeting. My mother's hand stopped. I haven't seen them stop in 5 winters. You tell me where you put it, and I'll put it where a decent man can reach when he has to. It wasn't decent, Sister Ruth said from the gloom behind the lantern. She had appeared as she always did, at the moment when rooms decide they will not behave without a schoolmistress. It was a trick we all enjoyed too much. That isn't the same. He flared. What do you call it when a priest puts his hand on your head and you sleep the way you did when your grandmother held you? You call that decent in this town. You made a hole to bury decent. I made a hole to bury a bottle, she said. Decency is heavier. You don't move it with a shovel. The plank under Brendan's boot teetered. The bank's edge sloughed an inch with the modest sigh the earth gives when it has been persuaded too long. He swore, the honest swear of a man whose threshold just lied to him. Caleb took 2 slow steps, the posture that says you will be embarrassed later if you keep going. Mara said his name, because there are moments when the only magic you own is syllables. Brendan, she said. Come back to the board. You threw help in the ground, he said, stubborn as a weather vane in a bad wind. He jabbed the shovel in. The blade cut a neat square in the sod, and then skidded on something that was not soil.
He pried.
The ground tore open like a button pot. For a breath all of them saw it, a dull, homely glint of glass, not miraculous, not wicked, a little obscene for being familiar. The rain ticked on it. The earth made the sound wet earth makes when it resents you. The plank shifted. Brendan lunged for the bottle by instinct the way men do when something that has promised them relief shows its lip. His boots slid. The square he'd cut dissolved into a batter-thick slurry. He went sideways. Caleb grabbed his jacket and had him until his own heel found the seam between board and ground. The 3 of them, cop, warehouse man, woman with a camera who had insisted on being present, wobbled in a brief, stupid dance. The ampulla rolled once in its cradle of mud, considered staying, and then, because water has friends, slid over the lip and into the narrow ditch that had become a green-brown stream. Father Vane came around the church corner, then, because men who have trained their knights to listen hear the shape of a panic. He took it in at a glance. Plank, hole, bottle, river. He stepped to the ditch, knees in muck, and reached a hand toward the bobbing black. The ditch took him at his word. Cold water clamped his sleeve to his skin. The glass glanced his fingers, slippery as a trout, then hit the down tangle of roots at the culvert and lodged. There are faces you see in a certain light that you never forget because they declare in public what most people have the manners to negotiate in private. Vane's was that face, a man with his hand in a black run that smelled like pennies the bone memory in his jaw voting drink, and the old rule, Noon's rule, voting fast. Take it, Brendan said, hoarse, teenager for a second, which is to say pure. Take it and we'll talk like men. No, Vane said, and it hit the word like iron rum. He closed his fingers around the neck, because if he didn't, someone else would, and in the same movement, he levered the glass out of the roots and let the current take it. The little bottle tumbled, indecorous, clinked stone to stone, turned once like a pet demanding a last look, and disappeared under the fence into the river proper. They all made the human noise. Oh, on a breath, that is neither grief nor relief. Brendan fell back onto the safe side of the plank, as if someone had turned a magnet. Caleb sat down because men who don't fall down choose the floor. Sister Ruth raised the lantern and made the sign of the cross without any of the reasons people would demand for it later. Mara photographed nothing and watched everything. It is not yours to drink, Vane said to Brendan. It is not mine to pour. It belongs to the thing that taught us both our manners. He meant the river. He might also have meant February. You could have kept my mother, Brendan said, small now, honest like a boy caught stealing bread for a dog. I could have kept her wrong, Vane said, his right hand, soaked now. The cloth dark, shook once at the wrist, and then learned obedience. I still want to. That is a sin I intend to starve. Brendan covered his face with both hands, as if to push remorse back in through his eyes. When he took them away, his cheeks were muddied, not dramatic. He looked at Sister Ruth with a child's crime on his jaw. I dug a grave up, he said. I dug a grave up to make a cup. You dug mud, she said. We bury bottles so men have to talk to each other. Go home. I'll come in the morning and make your mother oatmeal the way someone should have taught you. He tried to laugh and failed. Something like a sob backed up and turned into steam. I can make oatmeal, he said. Then I'll stand in your kitchen and watch you, she said lightly, which is the ministry God forgot to put in the book. They all stood a while because standing is the only proof the nervous system trusts. Caleb put a flat hand on Brendan's shoulder in the way men do when handcuffs would be a lie. Mara steadied the lantern, while Sister Ruth relayed her board. Vane wrung out his sleeve with a carefulness that broke her heart. Not a martyr, a man in a wet shirt. Tomorrow you tell them, Mara said into the rain. Not the trick, the not trick. At noon, he said, where the light trains me to be honest. He walked to the rectory without dramatics, wet to the elbow, hair plastered to his skull like a penitent in a painting he would hate. The river took the bottle and pretended not to care. It carried it around the bend toward the bridge and under it, turned it 3 times because water likes theater when you aren't looking, and worried it against the pilings until the glass cracked with the modest sound something makes when a story releases it. A braid of black unspooled and folded itself into the broader darkness, and if the river tasted different for a minute, that was between the river and its mouth. At dawn there was ice again at the edges. February wanted the last word. In the cemetery the board held. The hole they had not marked forgot its lip. On the rectory windowsill a purificator lay in a neat rectangle to dry. The shape his hand had made in it was a pale map for someone else to learn from. Chapter 10, The Fast. By the next noon the flyers had learned a new line. Soup at the hall 6 to 8. Tea at the convent as needed. Doyle copied it by hand and tucked it in the corners of the original because Christ loves marginalia. The church filled the way rooms fill when something has happened and nobody wants a headline. Men on their lunch break. Women with hairnets still snapped to their skulls. Children let out from the school with instructions to come straight back if anything looked like it needed adult names. Vane stood at the bowl with his right hand wrapped in a clean white cloth, not theatrical, the sensible concession of a man who has learned that noon requires accessories. The water wore its linen collar pulled back like a widow willing to flirt again. Sun came through green and gold and tired purple. Tomas tucked his violin under the pew and did not touch it unless the room demanded a note. I owe you what we buried, Vane said, and there was no Latin left in him. Only a man reporting to a union hall. A bottle went into the ground last week. It did not stay. The river took it last night. I watched it go. I wanted to keep it. Sister Ruth watched me want. Officer Price did not make me impress my appetite on a form. Miss Moran watched with that look she has that makes rooms behave. I am telling you everything I can bear to say at noon. A rumble, laughter that didn't laugh, moved along the nave. Mrs. Finn's daughter sat with her hands folded like someone who has found the right size of lap. Brendan stood at the back, jaw set not to apologize. Men have to be allowed that. I do not intend midnight baptisms anymore, he said. I intend work, touch, wet, word. And I intend a fast so public it will be difficult to break. If I am hungry for you, I will go to the river and let it scold me. If you are hungry for me, you'll go to Sister Ruth and she will put a cool cloth on your neck and tell you a story about a desert until you are embarrassed out of art. The room actually laughed, Relief's small cousin. Sister Ruth inclined her head with the stateliness of an old lieutenant who has been promoted reluctantly to general. He said the blessing. He did not pour. He did not kiss. He lifted a cross. He laid a hand. The bowl behaved. Water as water, bored and holy. Men came away with faces that did not beg for the wrong snacks at 3. Women exhaled like kettles after you take them off the heat. When Tomas came, Vane raised a hand and lowered it again, thinking of old habits. He touched only the crown. You are not a cup, he said softly, and this time the boy did not startle, did not sprint. He looked briefly, terrifyingly, like a man who might teach other boys not to bolt. Ray did not go forward. He sat, a hand curved on the pew in front, would translating him into itself. When the line dwindled, he raised his voice one notch, no drama. Are you teaching men to put their hands on other men's heads without making debt? He asked. If they'll let me, Vane said. Teach them, Ray said. We've had a drought of that. After the dismissal, nobody left. Graybridge had discovered it could loiter at noon if the reason was decency. They formed an untidy ring near the front. Sister Ruth, Maddie, Doyle, Brendan near but not in, Mara with her camera not lifted, Caleb with his notebook not open. Vane pulled a chair forward and a second. He sat like a man who intended to stay until the chair's tired. Show us, Sister Ruth said, the right way to touch a head, the thing you do that isn't theft.
He did.
He showed the shape, palm light at the crown, fingers loose, the mercy of not gripping. He showed the wrong ways and made men laugh at themselves without cruelty. He put Ray's hand on his own skull and let the old man feel where bone prefers kindness. He let Brendan try and said good in the small tone coaches used to save boys who had been screamed at too often. He let Tomas stand behind Maddie and place his palm on hair without apology or hunger, and then step back, instructed and uninjured. Now teach throats, Ray said, which was about as much poetry as he would be caught doing on a weekday. Vane smiled ruefully and placed his hand at the nape of Caleb's neck. Here, he said, where babies remember being kept, not pressing, just reminding the body it has a back. Caleb closed his eyes like a man startled to discover he possessed a vertebrae. I'll allow it, he said, dry, and the room laughed because humor is the town's way of blessing anything that needs an exit. They set the soup line up that evening in the parish hall. Potato, chicken noodle, a chili with ambitions. Maddie ran the ladles like a sergeant who believes in spoonfuls measured to the line. Sister Ruth presided over the tea like the high priest of the sacrament nobody wrote down. Brendan carried bowls in and out and did not make a speech, which in this town is a redeemed man's miracle. Tomas stood near the stage and played one clean note, then another, like a room being asked politely to reconsider its mood. Mara took 2 pictures and hated herself less for them than she had expected. 1. Sister Ruth's hand steadying a kettle spout over a mug while a woman laughed with her eyes shut. 2. Ray teaching Doyle to fold a towel so it sits obedient on the back of a neck. The light in both frames was ungenerous, honest. The pictures would not win prizes. They would outlast prizes. When people drifted home, the church looked like you wanted church to look after an unscheduled feast. Chairs speaking softly to one another about being useful, a smell of onion, a line of clean mugs upside down on a towel, the font's collar pulled back and drying, its ring now only the faint embroidery of a habit being resewn. On the rectory steps, Vane sat with his wet sleeve now dry. his wrapped hand unwrapped to the air. The skin on the back of it had refused melodrama, a new thinness, tenderness under color. The bruise at the nail bed had gone from plum to yellow to a story he could tell with a shrug. The sun, low, struck his knuckles, and he let it. He flinched small, and then did not. The fast, like all good fasts, had become a practice less interesting than a vow. Mara took the last picture she would take of him. No face, just a hand on a windowsill that had learned the weather, and beyond it the river in late light giving away none of its opinions. She lowered the camera. He looked over without being invited into her private mercy and said, "You will leave again." "Yes," she said, with less contempt. "Good," he said. "Bring less contempt back when you visit."
He stood.
Sister Ruth came around the corner with a dish towel over her shoulder like a deacon and a benediction. Caleb, having learned that writing less in his notebook sometimes did more, walked the perimeter with hands in pockets and did not expect trouble. Ray, in his chair because nights get long, looked at the sky as if to check whether it was on schedule. Tomas, hat on, case in hand, went home before midnight because boys can be taught. They rang the little brass bell once, not to summon, not to dismiss, just to hear that a small coin of sound could be enough. The flood never came. The river, denied its favorite chance at theater, sulked back between its banks and busied itself with fish. In the cemetery the square nobody had marked settled and grew the first ragged grass of March. The safe in the sacristy kept money and papers. Nobody put their hunger in it again. The town learned to be thirsty in public and filled its cups with soup and tea and names said back properly. At Easter, the vigil that belonged to a calendar rather than a man, the bowl held clear water that had been warmed in kettles carried across the nave by women whose wrists knew the weight. Father Vane blessed it in the words he was permitted and flinched only once when the light rushed the sanctuary as the doors were thrown open. It was a good flinch. It meant his body still told the truth. He baptized 2 babies whose mothers smelled of talc and sleep. He did not kiss anything but the book. He put his hand at the backs of small necks and reminded them without debt that they were held. When it was over, nobody applauded. Doors are for leaving. Bells are for telling the time. Water is for remembering you have a mouth. Graybridge put on its coats and went home to Ham and the serious business of hiding eggs in an honest house. The river ran, not offended. The little brass bell, later, rang once because someone had a hand free and liked the sound of a coin when it chooses to be small. Epilogue after the fast. By summer the town had a noon-shaped habit. Flyers no longer needed reminding. People showed up as if it were lunch with their better selves. The bowl wore its linen collar back like a widow who'd remembered how to laugh. Touch, wet, word, no tricks. Afterward there was soup if it was Tuesday, tea if it was any other kind of weather, and the small trade in decency that made a parish hall feel like an honest kitchen. The river sulked through March and forgave April. Fishermen found 3 harmless shards of dark glass snagged in willow roots and tossed them back without realizing they were throwing away a story. Downstream, boys skimmed flat stones and never once brought home a bottle that taught their mouths the wrong lesson. Sister Ruth kept hours like a lighthouse. She learned to say "I'm closed" with her hands on a kettle and make it sound like compassion. When midnight thirst knocked, she answered with a cool cloth and a story about a desert so plain it embarrassed men into sleeping. On Sundays, she took a chair under the maples after Mass and taught anyone who asked how to set a palm on a skull without stealing. Brendan Garrity came back to the hall before anyone asked him to. On the second Tuesday, he served bowls, eyes not quite daring the front of the room. On the third, he laughed at a joke Maddie made about chili and absolution, and his laugh sounded like something that would be good at mending fences if you handed it a hammer. His mother's hands shook on rainy days and steadied under Sister Ruth's tea. Brendan learned to steady them, too. Tomas stopped touching the old hurt at his hairline. He played a note to warm a room and then put the violin away because sometimes the best music is in the way people stand easier. In June, he taught 3 middle schoolers to put their palms lightly at the back of each other's necks and say, "Here is your spine." They giggled. They learned. Caleb wrote less. He watched more. Some nights he parked by the river and practiced not being a door. The ledger of his pocket notebook fattened with good lines anyway. No midnight, no miracles, just people. Teach throats, not hunger. Water remembers, so should we. Mara left when the house sold, and her father had settled into the care home's rhythm of pills and small victories. She took the least impressive photograph she'd ever loved, Sister Ruth's hand, raised knuckles on the pew, a priest's wrapped hand, the clear bowl, and hung it where city light could not flatter it. She came back for the funeral in October because daughters do, and the priest did not cheat. Ray died with the window open, a decent breeze on his face and a palm at his nape to remind his body it was still held. Vane didn't promise eternity. He remembered a man out loud. After the morning ham, Mara walked to the bridge and let the river read her, and for the first time since 19, she did not argue with water. Father Silas learned noon the way men learn their backs after a winter, slowly, with stubbornness, until the ache turned into strength. The bruise at his nail bed faded to a thin crescent you'd miss, unless you'd held the linen he stained. He kept the little bell's rope within view of his work. If his fingers even twitched toward his mouth, someone, child, widow, usher, gave the rope a single, bright coin of sound. He flinched less in sunlight. He slept with windows open. When midnight pressed its old face to the glass, he answered with boiled water and the grammar of restraint. Easter came and went. Babies were held over warmed water. Women cried in the way relief permits, and nobody kissed anything but the book. If you stood in the nave at noon, you could smell soap, onions, wet coats, and the small animal honesty inside a tired town. The cemetery leaned into the church wall like an old friend. The square nobody had marked grew grass. One evening in late summer, a letter arrived from a sister house in a desert. "We have no more of the black," the writer said in a hand that looked like prayer and ledger both. "We have a great deal of thirst. Tea is winning." He folded it, put it in the sacristy ledger where men keep the minutes of their better decisions, and taped a new card to the inside of the rectory door, the kind a town will remember long after fonts are replaced and roofs are reshingled. No ampullas, no burrs, no kisses, soup at 6, tea when asked. The bell rang once, small and good. The river minded its business. The town held, and thirst, for once, learned not to make a mouth into a cup.